Hi there, it's me, Finn. And tonight we're going to talk about the weird life of royalty in medieval times. Royalty, right? Golden crowns, huge castles, fancy feasts. But have you ever wondered what it was really like to live as a king, or queen, or maybe just a royal cousin, who nobody really liked? Was it really all feasts and fans? Or was there something a little strange, a little odd, a little, unexpected? Like, how often did they bathe? What if I told you they had a favorite royal food, made entirely of jelly and crushed fish? Or that kings sometimes couldn't read? Or that royal beds were full of bugs? Yeah, let's start by subscribing. Now, lay back, take a deep breath, and let's begin. So, imagine you're waking up in a giant room. The walls are made of stone, cold stone. There's no heater, just a fire, gently crackling in the corner. Your bed, it's big, but not soft. It's filled with straw, old feathers, sometimes even moss. Not very royal, right? The blanket? That would be wool. Thick, scratchy, smells like sheep. Sometimes it's lined with fur, if you're important enough. But it's always heavy. Too heavy for summer. Never enough for winter. The king or queen wouldn't rise alone. Oh no, a servant would enter first. Quietly, with a candle, carefully. They'd whisper, "My lord, it is morning." And you, well, you'd groan a little, because even royalty didn't enjoy early mornings. First thing, a small bowl of water. Not warm, just, room temperature. To wash your face, hands, mouth. No toothpaste, just a rough cloth. And sometimes a minty herb, like sage, rubbed on the teeth, to freshen breath. Now here's a weird part. Your royal clothes, they're not chosen by you. Nope, there's a wardrobe servant for that. They lay them out based on what day it is. Feast day, velvet. Rainy day, wool. Church day, silks, sometimes with golden thread. All heavy, all stiff. You'd raise your arms. They'd dress you like a doll. One sleeve, two sleeves, buckles, laces, ties, shoes with long pointed toes. Some royal shoes were so long, they had to be tied to the knees. Then comes the announcement. Usually by a page boy or attendant. His Majesty is dressed and prepared to receive the morning report. What's the morning report? That's when your scribes bring you scrolls, letters, updates. But not every king could read them. That's the odd thing. Yep, many kings couldn't read, not even their names. Reading was, for monks. And learning Latin, well, that was considered church stuff. So the letters were read to them. In slow voices. Sometimes they'd nod. Sometimes they'd fall asleep in the chair. Must have been nice. By now, your breakfast is being prepared. You don't go to the kitchen. You don't even walk to the hall sometimes. They bring it to you on a tray, made of wood or silver, depending on how wealthy your kingdom is. But here's the strange thing. Royal breakfasts were not like ours. You might get a meat pie. Yes, meat, maybe some bread, dipped in ale. No coffee, no orange juice, just ale and milk. Sometimes milk was served warm, with herbs like rosemary. You'd sit near the window, birds chirping outside, or maybe rain tapping softly on the stone. Eat slowly, while a musician plays something gentle in the corner. A harp, perhaps. Now, your job as royalty isn't just sitting all day. You have to attend the Great Hall. That's the big room in the middle of the castle. Cold, echoey. Big chairs, long table. People come to ask you for help, or permission, or forgiveness. Some say their cow wandered onto your land. Others, ask if they can marry their cousin's cousin. Strange requests. And you listen, and you nod. And sometimes you say, "Let it be so," even if you have no idea what they're talking about. That's royal life. Now, here's another weird thing. Royalty had food tasters. Why? Because people often poisoned each other. Even family. Especially family. So, before you bite into your pie, someone else has to bite it first. Wait a minute. Then if they don't drop dead, you're free to eat. Can you imagine? Being so important that your lunch needs its own test subject. Sometimes, you don't even want to eat after that. But, food in the palace was, well, a bit odd anyway. Jellied eels. Pickled fruit with meat. Swan. Yes, roast swan. Sometimes peacock. They'd even put the feathers back on after cooking, to make it look alive again. Weird, right? But it was all part of the display, not just to eat, but to be seen eating it. In the afternoon you might go for a walk, not outside. No, no, royalty didn't walk the muddy roads. Instead, you'd walk through the inner courtyard, slow steps, hand behind the back, maybe a falcon on your arm. Yes, some royalty kept falcons, just to show they were noble. The falcon would wear a tiny leather hood and sit quietly, waiting to hunt. But you just wanted a nap. You head back to your private chambers, and if you're lucky, there's a warm fire going, a soft chair, stuffed with hay. And maybe, just maybe, your jester is there. Ah yes, the jester. He's not like a clown, more like a talking mirror. He says silly things, but also honest ones. He might say, "Your Majesty, that tunic makes you look like a squash." And everyone would laugh, even you. Because it's allowed, just once, to laugh at yourself. Being royal is strange. Evening falls, and you know what that means, the feast. But here's the twist. Not every night has a feast. Some nights are just regular. A wooden bowl of soup, bread, maybe cheese. You eat with your fingers. Everyone did, even kings. Knives were used to cut, but forks. Not yet common. People wiped their hands on the tablecloth, or their clothes. Ill, right? And wine, always wine. Sometimes watered down, sometimes spiced. And after the meal, music. Always music. A lute, a harp, a voice, gently singing. Time slows. As night comes, you head to your bed again. But remember, it's not just your bed. There are guards outside the door. Sometimes a servant sleeping in the corner. And your bed, may have fleas. Even royalty had trouble with that. They'd hang tapestries on the wall to keep out the cold, and tuck herbs between the sheets to scare bugs away. Lavender, mint, not always enough. You'd lie down, close your eyes, and dream of something simple, like a soft bed, a quiet place, and no more decisions to make. Because even for royalty, sleep was the only moment of peace. But the weirdest thing of all was the crown. It didn't feel powerful or magical. It felt heavy, sometimes made of gold, sometimes iron, and it pressed down on your head, so much that you couldn't think clearly. Maybe being royal wasn't as grand as it sounds. But tomorrow, we'll explore more. What happens when the royal family argues? What if a prince runs away? What do queens actually do all day? You'll see soon. So, where were we? Ah yes, you were lying in your heavy bed, thick curtains drawn to keep in the warmth. Your crown resting on a small table nearby. Candles flickering as shadows danced across the stone walls. The castle is quiet now, but not silent. There's the soft creaking of wooden beams, the distant howl of wind pressing against the tower, and maybe the muffled sound of someone walking the corridor below. A guard? A servant? Or maybe a brother, sneaking back from somewhere he shouldn't have been. Yes, tonight, let's talk about the royal family. Being king or queen is already strange enough, but living with other royals, even stranger. Because you don't just live with a family. You live with a system. There's always a pecking order. The king on top, then the queen, then their children, then their cousins, then, people who claim they're cousins, but probably just want to be close to the kitchen. Let's take the prince for example. He has everything. Servants, tutors, horses, a private chapel. But he also has something else. Pressure. Ah yes, everyone watches him. He has to learn Latin. He has to learn sword fighting. He has to sit through long church sermons without scratching his nose. Poor kid. He can't play outside freely. Can't eat sweets without permission. Can't even laugh too loud during official meetings. And if there's a younger brother, let's just say, things get awkward. Because younger royal siblings, they get the scraps. Not just at dinner, but in life. They're trained for secondary duties. The church, the military, or marriage alliances. Sent away. Sometimes forgotten. But sometimes they don't like that plan. And that's when the drama begins. There's a story of one royal brother, who dressed as a farmer, slipped out at night, and lived in a tavern for 3 whole months, just to avoid a marriage with a foreign princess. You won't believe this can even happen, but it did. Now let's talk about royal daughters, princesses.
I'm sorry, you might think they live like fairy tales. But really, they live like pieces on a chessboard. Their value?
Not in their laughter, not in their paintings, but in who they could marry. So at age 6, A princess might already be promised to a boy she never met, in a land she's never seen, with customs she doesn't understand. And by 12 or 13, she'd be sent off, on a cart, with a chest of clothes, and a priest, and a cat, maybe. Poor girl. But even at home, her life wasn't simple. She had to sit quietly during feasts, smile politely, practice her embroidery, learn to sing softly, and always stay clean.
Ah, that's the hard part. Because in castles, staying clean was very difficult. There was no plumbing, baths were rare, water was hauled in buckets, soap was chunky, made of lye and animal fat, smelled a bit like bacon. And privacy, none. Even the queen would bathe in a wooden tub, while attendants stood nearby with cloths, or herbs, or just to make sure she didn't slip and drown in 3 inches of lukewarm water. Weird, right? Now, speaking of the queen, let's take a slow walk through her day. She wakes up after the king, because her ladies-in-waiting need to finish preparing her gowns. All those layers, a linen shift, then a corset, then an undergown, then an outer gown, then a belt, then the headdress, then shoes. Sometimes it took over an hour, just to get dressed.
Then, she'd head to the chapel. Yes, royals prayed every morning. And they didn't just sit in silence. They had to kneel, and stand, and kneel again, in stiff gowns. Next, came the royal correspondence. Letters to other queens, sisters, daughters, sometimes secret notes tucked into ribbons, sprinkled with perfume, and dusted with crushed roses. If the king allowed it, the queen might host a guest, or walk the gardens, or oversee the household accounts. Yes, the queen had to budget the castle, buy food, pay servants, order candles, check the wine barrels. It wasn't all dancing and ballads. But here's the weirdest part. Sometimes, the queen wasn't the king's only partner. Yeah, royal mistresses were common. They often lived inside the castle, in fancy rooms, with gifts, and sometimes, even servants of their own. And the queen? Well, she had to smile, act like it was normal, because it kind of was. Strange, right? But in that time, power was more important than love. So people accepted odd things, even sharing a husband. Now let's move to a different room. The royal nursery, where little princes and princesses lived. It wasn't full of toys, no stuffed animals, no wooden trains, just cradles, chairs, a small rug, and lots of nurses. You wouldn't believe how many people it took to raise one royal baby. There was a wet nurse, a dry nurse, a cradle rocker, a lullaby singer, a food taster, a diaper washer. Sometimes the queen didn't see her own baby for days. And when royal children cried, they weren't always picked up. Some believed that would spoil them. Instead, they'd be rocked, gently, slowly, and someone would whisper lullabies in Latin, or light incense, or wave dried herbs to calm the child. You're probably thinking, wow, that doesn't sound like a childhood at all. And you'd be right, because royal children weren't raised to be happy. They were raised to be ready. Ready for rules. Ready for alliances. Ready for duty. Now, let's talk about meals again. Because family dinners weren't exactly cozy. At the royal table, everyone had a specific seat. King at the head, queen beside him, then the oldest son, then the second son, then noble guests, then more family. No swapping seats, no changing places. Even talking had rules. Only speak when spoken to. No laughing with your mouth open. No reaching across the table. Stiff, isn't it? And the food, well, we already know it was odd. But here's another thing. Sometimes, dishes were brought out just to be seen, not eaten, like a whole roasted boar with an apple in its mouth, or a pie that opened to release live birds, or a jelly castle, shaped like the real castle, just to impress visitors. Then taken away. Hungry yet? Right? Now, as the evening gets late, family members return to their chambers. But some stay up for nighttime lessons. Yes, lessons. Because some royals learned astronomy, or chess, or languages, like Old French, by candlelight. And sometimes, by force. Tutors would nudge them awake, say things like, "You'll never marry a princess if you don't know how to conjugate Latin verbs. Poor kid, he just wants to sleep." Others, especially the curious ones, would sneak down into the kitchens, past the guards, through the servant halls, down the spiral steps. Why? To steal honeycakes, or roasted chestnuts, or just to feel normal. Yeah, even royal teens did that. Some say one queen used to sneak into the stables and sleep beside her favorite horse, because she said, the horse is the only one who never lies. Strange, right? But kind of sweet. Now, let's drift back to the queen's chambers. She's brushing her hair. Not herself, of course. Her maid does it. 100 strokes. Always before bed. To remove the dust and the stress. Her hair smells like lavender oil. She looks in the mirror and maybe wonders, what if I were not queen? What if I lived in the village, wore simple clothes, laughed in the market, and chose my own husband? But she doesn't say it. She just nods, closes her eyes, and allows the crown to be placed beside her pillow. Because tomorrow, she must wake again, smile, pray, host guests, write letters, sit at feasts, and pretend the royal life isn't strange, even when it is. But tonight, let her sleep. Let them all sleep. The king, the queen, the prince, the maid, even the falcon in the tower. All dreaming beneath the heavy stone walls, where every shadow hides a secret, and every golden crown carries something heavy. If you're still with me, we're only just getting started. The next part. Well, what happens when royalty gets sick? Or when they try to cure a cough with frog jelly? Yep, it gets weirder. But not yet. For now, sleep. The fire has faded now, just soft embers glowing in the hearth. You're still lying there, aren't you? Wrapped in thick wool covers, your mind drifting like mist over the castle rooftops. Good. Because now, let's talk about what happens when royalty gets sick. Ah yes. Even kings and queens got colds. They sneezed, coughed, felt feverish, sometimes worse. But the way they were treated, it wasn't what you'd expect. No medicine cabinets. No clean syringes. No sweet cherry-flavored syrups. Instead, they had something called humors. Not like funny jokes, but humors, bodily fluids. According to royal physicians, the body had 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. And if one was out of balance, the body would get sick. So what did they do? Well, to balance those humors, they'd try some very weird things. For example, if a king had a headache, they might place leeches behind his ears. Or if he had a stomachache, they might feed him mashed figs, mixed with crushed beetles. A queen with a cough, she'd be told to sip a mixture of honey, wine, and powdered pearls. Yes, pearls. They believed powdered jewels had healing power. But, probably just gave them chalky burps. Now, the royal doctors weren't like today's doctors. They didn't wear white coats. They wore long robes, tall hats, and sometimes carried staffs or wands carved with animals. They didn't always go to medical school, but instead studied ancient books. Books written hundreds of years before, by people who thought sneezing meant your soul tried to escape your body. Strange, right? Still, they did their best. Let's imagine a prince wakes up with a fever. His bed is soaked in sweat. His face is red. His eyes watery. A servant rushes to fetch the physician. And what does the doctor do? He sniffs the boy's breath, looks at his tongue, taps on his chest, and then says, he must be bled. Ah yes, bleeding. They believed that draining some blood could balance the body. So, they'd take a silver bowl, a small blade, and cut a vein in the prince's arm. The blood would pour out, until the boy looked pale. Then they'd stop. Did it help? Most of the time, no. But it made them feel like they were doing something. And sometimes people did get better by luck. Other times, they turned to stranger methods. There was one cure for nightmares, where they'd place a frog in a velvet pouch and hang it over the sleeping royal's bed. They believed the frog would eat the bad dreams. Poor frog. Or if a royal had a rash, they might soak in a bath of boiled herbs, like rosemary, sage, and crushed snail shells. If that didn't work, well, they'd try mustard paste, rubbed directly onto the skin. Burned like fire, but they swore it helped. Now, let's say it wasn't a cold. Let's say the royal had something worse, something dangerous. Then, it was time for the sick room. A quiet chamber, far from the main halls. Curtains drawn, candles lit, servants hushed. A priest would be called in, just in case. Not for healing, but for last words. Even royals feared death. Despite the gold, the tapestries, the marble floors, they too were fragile. But let's not go too dark tonight. Because sometimes, they got better. And when they did, there was celebration. The cooks would prepare a healing feast, light broths, soft breads, and fruits soaked in wine, and a royal recovering from illness was expected to give thanks to God, to the saints, to the doctors, and sometimes, to the frogs. But wait, not all royal sicknesses were real, some were faked. Ah yes, imagine a young princess, tired of her embroidery lessons, so she eats a bunch of rose petals, turns pale, and tells her maid she's dizzy. The physician is called. She lies in bed for 3 days, while her tutors whisper, "Poor thing." But really, she's playing cards with her maid, and sneaking honey cakes under the blankets. Clever girl. Then there were the melancholies. That's what they called sadness. Royalty didn't have the word depression. Instead, they said someone was filled with black bile. And how did they treat that? Well, they'd prescribe music, soft harp playing, quiet singing, or reading poetry aloud. Sometimes, they'd release doves into the chamber, just to lift the spirits. And if that didn't help, they'd be sent to the countryside, to breathe clean air, to look at flowers, to watch geese waddle by. But there's something even stranger. Some royals believed that illness was a punishment from heaven. They'd fast for days, whip themselves lightly, sleep on the cold stone floor, just to show they were sorry. Sad. Really, they were just people, trying to stay well, in a world that didn't understand what wellness really meant. But let's float away from the sick room now, back to the royal gardens. Ah, this is where healing happened too. Not with doctors, but with gardeners. Because many castles had herbalists, women and men who knew the power of plants.
Chamomile for calm, lavender for sleep, mint for stomach aches. They grew them carefully, in little square plots, tended with gloved hands. And when a royal had a complaint, the herbalist would mix a potion, wrapped in cloth, tied with string, and delivered with a bow. Let's say the king couldn't sleep. The herbalist would give him a sachet. Inside, dried poppy petals, cinnamon bark, a touch of valerian root. He'd place it under his pillow, and maybe, just maybe, drift off.
Now, let's not forget the royal animals. Yes, they had doctors too. Horses with coughs, falcons with sore talons, dogs with fever. Royal beasts were important. So, veterinarians came, with strange instruments, hot irons, wool wraps, and jars filled with who knows what. If the queen's dog was limping, everything stopped, until the little thing was tucked in a silk blanket, with a poultice on its paw. Some say one duke once ordered a mass for his cat, because it sneezed during breakfast. Strange, right? But when everything is strange, nothing feels out of place. That's the royal world. Let's walk now, down the quiet corridor, where a young prince sits by the fire. His nose is red, a cloth tucked under his chin. He's sniffling, sipping broth from a silver spoon. And beside him, a tall man reading aloud. It's a book of legends, tales of knights and dragons, of great battles, and loyal squires. The prince smiles, even as he sneezes, and the fire crackles gently. Somewhere above him, the queen is also ill, wrapped in furs, her feet soaking in a bucket of warm milk. A maid brushes her hair, and whispers, "You'll feel better tomorrow, Your Grace." The queen sighs, nods, and drifts, just slightly. But illness wasn't always physical. There was also the weight of royal expectation, the pressure to smile, to marry, to speak politely, to act wise, even when confused. That kind of pressure. It made some royals walk in the gardens at midnight, or stare out windows for hours, or cry when no one was looking. But they hid it, because royals weren't supposed to feel weak, even when they were very, very tired. There's a story of a king who once canceled an entire feast. Why? Because his finger was sore. That's it. He said, "If I must shake hands tonight, I shall scream." Everyone was sent home, and the king spent the evening soaking his royal finger in warm brandy. Royalty really did live differently. But sometimes, just sometimes, they were ordinary. A princess scared of thunder, a duke who chewed with his mouth open, a queen who hated wearing shoes indoors. They sneezed, coughed, caught fevers, and every time, the castle responded. Dozens of feet rushing, herbs boiled, chickens plucked, letters written to bishops, asking for blessings. Because if royalty got sick, everyone felt the chill, even the walls, even the air. But tonight, let's pretend the fire is warm, that no one is sick, that the beds are soft, that the stars above the tower sparkle gently, like jewels in the black velvet sky. The king is snoring, the queen is dreaming, the dog is curled up by the hearth, the cat is watching the shadows, and the prince, he's finally wrapped in velvet blankets, beside a silver bowl of fig syrup, and a forgotten slipper on the rug. Let's not wake him. Let's not wake anyone. Just stay here, in the quiet, until morning. Shoo. It's late again. The castle is quiet. The stone halls cool to the touch. Only the moon keeps watch now. Are you resting? Lying still, tucked in warm blankets, eyes half closed. Good. Because tonight, we're heading somewhere a little darker. Still gentle, still soft. But now, we'll step into the shadows of royal superstition. A world of omens and signs, and curious little rituals to keep fate at bay. Let's begin with a queen, looking out a tall, narrow window. She sees a crow, just one, sitting on the chapel roof, and her heart freezes. Why? Because in her time, a lone crow meant death was coming. Silly? Perhaps, but that queen would cancel her appointments, send offerings to the church, and sleep with a sprig of rosemary under her pillow. Just in case. Royalty, despite all their wealth, feared bad luck, maybe more than common folk, because they had more to lose, so they clung to rituals, tiny things, wearing a specific color on feast days, only entering a room with the left foot first, tying a red ribbon under the gown before a journey. If they didn't, whispers of doom would spread faster than spilled wine. Now, let's step into the royal nursery, where a baby prince is asleep in a golden cradle. The room is filled with charms. Above the cradle, a silver spoon, tied with white lace, tucked under the mattress, a dried mole's foot, and hanging on the wall, a stitched image of Saint Margaret, holding a key. Each item meant to protect, from illness, from demons, from the evil eye. Yes, the evil eye. That terrible curse, said to be cast by a single stare. If someone looked at the baby too long, especially with jealousy, the child might grow weak, or strange. So the nursemaids were taught, never praise a baby out loud. Instead they'd say, "Oh, what an ugly child. Oh, so plain." And only then, smile secretly, when no one was listening. Superstitions were clever like that. Backwards but meant to help. Now, let's wander into the royal kitchen. A large smoky room filled with steam and clatter. Here, even food had rules. Salt must never be spilled. Bread must never be placed upside down. And if the cook dropped a knife, she'd cross herself 3 times. Because knives meant quarrels, especially on holy days. And if the king was dining, even stranger precautions were taken. Each dish might be tasted by a servant first, not for flavor, but to ensure it wasn't poisoned. There were even tasting dogs. Small, shaggy pups fed the first bite of meat. If the dog whined or fainted, the plate was thrown out the window. Sometimes the royal wine was stirred with a unicorn horn, or what they believed was one. Usually just a carved narwhal tusk. But they thought it could purify any poison, so the queen's goblet might have a long spiral rod resting in it, looking magical, but doing nothing at all. Still, they felt safer. Let's walk now to the castle chapel. Here, superstitions mixed with faith. Because while royalty believed in God, they also believed in signs. If a candle sputtered during mass, a storm was coming. If a bell rang by itself, someone would die within a week. One king refused to enter the chapel on Thursdays. Why? Because years ago, he had a nightmare about drowning on a Thursday. Ever since, he prayed from his bed instead. There were even rules about dreams. If a prince dreamt of a white horse, he'd be married within a year. If he dreamed of teeth falling out, disaster. The royal dream interpreters would be summoned. Old men with thin beards and dusty scrolls. They'd sit beside the royal bed, listening carefully, then murmur things like, "Beware water. Don't sign any documents this month. Eat more turnips." And sometimes, superstition turned a little wild. Let's talk about omens in childbirth. If a royal baby was born during a thunderstorm, it was said to be cursed with a wild spirit. That child might grow up reckless, unruly, too bold. So the midwives would wrap the baby in wolfskin to calm the fire in its blood. Other times, they checked the baby's first cry. If it came late, the child was marked for sorrow. If it came fast and strong, a king or queen in the making. Even the castle walls had their superstitions. They placed coins under the foundations to buy peace from the earth spirits. And every gate had a carving above it. A saint, a symbol, a strange face sticking out its tongue. These were called gargoyles. part drainpipe, part protector. They were meant to scare away evil, which is why they looked so silly. Now, imagine a royal feast, long tables, dozens of candles, a roasted boar with an apple in its mouth, and suddenly, a cat walks in, just a gray tabby. Everyone freezes, because if the cat walked under the table, it meant a secret would be revealed that night. Everyone would glance nervously, and the king would clutch his goblet tighter. So strange, so specific. But in those days, superstition filled the gaps between knowledge. Where science was missing, magic crept in. Let's go to the royal wardrobe now. Ah yes, even clothing had its lore. Wearing green on Wednesdays, unlucky. Wearing pearls before sunset, a sign of grief. And if the queen's gown ripped as it was being tied, she must change completely, lest bad luck follow her all day. Tailors kept charms in their pockets, little bones, twisted thread, dried herbs, and before a royal fitting, they'd whisper a prayer, to stitch without sorrow, to cut without care. Let no cloth carry burden, let no hem snare. Even the king's crown had secrets. Some were made with bells hidden inside, tiny ones, so when he walked, the bells would jingle, keeping spirits away. Not loud, just faint enough, that no one noticed, except the ghosts. Let's pause a moment. Listen. Hear that wind outside the tower. A soft hush, like breath against stone. The castle listens too. It has ears of a sort, because royalty believed the walls could remember, that if you spoke secrets near a tapestry, the thread would hold the words. So the king's advisors spoke in low tones, in corners, away from portraits. Even mirrors were feared. A broken mirror, 7 years of sorrow. So the queen's mirrors were made of polished silver, not glass. And when she passed away, they'd cover the mirrors with black cloth, so her soul wouldn't get trapped. Gently strange, isn't it? There were also omens of success. A spider crawling on your sleeve during breakfast. A good day ahead. A double yolk in your egg. Fortune. A dropped spoon. A guest is coming. Every little event carried a meaning. Even the stars were watched. Royal astrologers mapped the sky and told the king when to start wars, or hold weddings, or cut his hair. Yes, even that. Haircuts were dangerous, you see. If done during the wrong moon phase, it might grow back unruly. So the barber waited for permission. And stars. Let's finish tonight's walk. Back in the royal garden, where the hedges sway, and the moonlight rests gently on the fountain. Here, among the herbs, the queen's superstitions bloomed. She believed if she whispered her wishes to the lavender, they'd float upward, like perfume, to the ears of kind spirits. She'd kneel, gloved hands clasped, and murmur, "Keep my children safe. Keep my enemies slow. Let the roses bloom early this year." Superstition was a form of hope, a way to tame chaos. Because even royals, with armies and jewels, felt small sometimes. So they clutched at symbols, patterns, tiny rituals, to make the world feel kinder, more predictable, more gentle, like tonight, like this moment. Soft, still, wrapped in hush. Now, the candles are low, the castle is breathing slowly, and in a quiet chamber, a princess slips a little stone under her pillow. Just a pebble, worn smooth by the sea. She believes it holds dreams. She's not sure why, it's just what her nursemaid told her. And so, she closes her eyes, and waits for the dreams to come. You can too. No omens, no signs, no bad luck here. Just peace, and quiet, until morning. Still with me. The fire is low now, and your breath is slow. Good. Tonight, we drift deeper, past the halls of superstition, and into something quieter, more personal. Let's wander through the royal daily routine, not the public version, not the loud processions or grand speeches. No, we're slipping into the soft hours, the tiny unnoticed habits, the odd quiet patterns that filled their days like grains of sand. Let's begin at dawn, but not with the king. Let's begin with the royal servants. They were the first to rise. While stars still shimmered, they moved through the cold stone corridors, barefoot, whispering, carrying brass pitchers of water, because before the king even opened his eyes, his water for washing had to be warm, his clothes warmed by the hearth, his chamber aired out, his boots brushed, and his combs laid out in a neat little row. Yes, combs. The king's hair was very important. He often had 3 men just for grooming, one for oiling the scalp, one for smoothing the beard, and one for selecting the perfume of the day. Today, let's imagine he chooses rose and cinnamon. Just a drop behind each ear, and a whisper of dusting powder on the collar. Ah. Breakfast, not what you might think. Royal breakfasts were small, especially before Mass. A little bread, a few slices of cold meat, warm ale or spiced wine. Eggs were considered rich. They might wait until mid-morning, but the real meal came later. Still, mornings had their rhythm. There was the dressing ceremony. Not just putting on clothes. Oh no, this was the ritual. 4, sometimes 5 servants would dress the king, each piece handed over slowly, each fold arranged, each buckle fastened with soft fingers. No rush, just rhythm. First the shirt, then hose, doublet, belt, overrobe. And if it was a feast day, then the clothes sparkled, embroidery, gold thread, buttons made of enamel or horn. Even the underlayers were elegant, because you never know who might catch a glimpse. Now, let's turn to the queen's morning. A little quieter, a little slower. She was usually woken by soft singing, a maid humming in the corner, while brushing her long hair. 100 strokes, just as the herbalist advised, to keep the strands glossy and calm the mind. Then, a gentle hand washing with rose water. Her jewelry was chosen based on mood: amethyst for peace, pearl for wisdom, carnelian for strength. Each stone had its meaning, its story, and she wore them like quiet armor. Then, prayer, always. The royal couple, separately or together, would kneel in small chapel alcoves. Candles flickered, voices murmured in Latin. Time slowed. These were the sacred minutes, before the court stirred, before noise and business began. And then, the day would open, like a curtain parting. Advisors arrived. Scrolls were brought in on velvet cushions. There was no paper yet, not like we know it. Royal orders were written on parchment, tied with string, stamped with heavy wax seals. The king would press his signet ring into the wax, a habit so old, he sometimes forgot what the ring even meant. But it mattered. Now, let's peek into the royal children's rooms. A little more playful. Wooden toys carved by hand, stuffed birds with glass bead eyes, tiny painted boxes filled with dried petals and smooth stones. Lessons began after breakfast. But not just reading. Royal children learned to sit still, to speak slowly, to bow, to nod without blinking. Yes, nodding was trained. A polite nod meant you were raised properly. Too deep? Too quick. You looked foolish. Too stiff. You looked proud. Ah, so many little rules. Then came Latin lessons. Always Latin. Because Latin was the language of power, of priests, of law. Even if the child hated it, they had to learn. So the tutors spoke slowly, scribbled letters on slate boards, and rewarded good memory with honeyed figs. Then came riding practice. Even princesses had to ride. But not just any horse. A calm, slow mare for beginners. Royal horses were brushed daily, braided, fed with oats soaked in wine, and their hooves, rubbed with goose fat in winter, to keep them from cracking in the frost. Lunchtime approached, and with it, another quiet ritual: washing of hands, in bowls of lemon water or lavender, depending on the day. Napkins were linen, folded just so. The midday meal, often several courses: soup, fish, a meat pie, stewed apples with nutmeg, a bit of cheese, but never mixed. Each course served slowly, because royalty didn't eat in haste. They chewed carefully, sipped gently, and dabbed the corners of their mouths, not just for cleanliness, but because manners were politics. After the meal, rest, not quite a nap, but close. The king would recline in his chamber, curtains drawn, pages fanning the air softly, and someone might read aloud, old tales, poems, history scrolls. The queen might stitch embroidery in golden thread, a lion chasing a deer, a tower with stars above it, a rose with too many petals. She'd hum, and forget the world for a while. Afternoons were busier: audiences, petitions, tiny decisions with long ripples. Should a road be repaired? Should a cousin be granted land? These were not exciting questions, but they shaped kingdoms, and they took hours, sitting on heavy chairs, listening to voices echo against the walls. Then, as the sun softened, music crept in. A lute, a psaltery, voices in harmony. Servants walked softer. The castle stretched and yawned. Evenings were near. But before dinner, there was always one small walk. A turn in the royal gardens, or the upper terraces, or the gallery filled with painted saints. The king and queen might stroll quietly, side by side, saying very little. just listening to footsteps, to wind through archways, to the creak of doors opening in distant halls. Dinner was slower still, long tables, small dishes, sweet wine poured with care. Musicians played softly in the corner, and the meal often ended with comfits, little sugar-coated seeds, anise, fennel, coriander, eaten slowly to freshen the breath and quiet the belly for sleep. The king would then retire to his solar, a private chamber, maybe to write letters, maybe to watch the stars. A servant might bring him his cloak of blue velvet, just in case he stepped out onto the balcony. The queen would be in her boudoir, brush in hand, mirror polished. Her ladies would remove pins from her hair, one by one. Combs passed back and forth, slippers changed, jewels returned to the carved wooden box, each motion slow, measured. Bedtime came with rituals. A priest might whisper a final prayer. The queen's dog might curl at the foot of the bed, wrapped in a blanket of its own. The king might sip warm ale, with a bit of nutmeg and honey stirred in. And then, silence. The castle sighed. The candles flickered low. The wind rustled the banners, and sleep descended. That was the daily rhythm, the strange quiet ticking of royal life. Not battles, not crowns, but slow mornings, soft walks, spiced wine, and linen napkins folded just so. It's not what we imagine, but it was real, and in its way, more curious than the tales of dragons and sieges, because it was human, awkward, tender, and quietly weird. Let your mind drift now, back to the rosewater, the slow nod, the leather boots brushed with wax, back to the whisper of Latin, and the purring of a royal cat curling beside a tapestry. Time melts away here, only the ticking remains. One slow step, after another, until morning. Ah, the fire's still warm, and the candles are just beginning to melt. Tonight, we step behind the curtain again, past the velvet and the gold thread, to peek into something even stranger. Yes. Tonight we look at what happened when royalty wasn't on the throne, but on the move. Royal travel in medieval times. Not exactly graceful, and not at all what you might imagine. Let's begin, just before sunrise. The chamber is dim, the king is already half-dressed, and servants move like shadows. Why travel at all? Well, sometimes duty called, sometimes curiosity, and sometimes simple escape. The castle, after all, could feel like a cage. A golden one, yes, but still a cage. When a journey was planned, it wasn't quiet. Dozens of scribes would prepare scrolls. Messengers galloped ahead to alert each village. Lords were told to ready their homes, or offer their halls, and food. Always food. You see, the royal pantry did not travel light. Oh no. It was a moving kitchen. Huge carts creaked under sacks of flour, bundles of leeks, barrels of ale sloshing with each bump in the road. The king had his own tasting cupbearer, of course. Yes. Every sip of wine, or nibble of cheese had to be tested. Not for flavor, but for poison. Because you never quite knew whose bread was safe, and whose was not. The queen packed lighter, mostly silks, embroideries, perfumes sealed with wax, and her own little prayer book, bound in leather, corners kissed with gold. She'd often read it on the road, not aloud, just silently, while the cart swayed, and the countryside rolled past like a painted scroll. Travel was slow, painfully slow. A mile could take an hour. The king's carriage was no sleek coach. It was a heavy wooden box, wrapped in iron bands. Inside, cushions, yes, but no springs. Every bump rattled the teeth. If it rained, the wheels sank into mud. If it snowed, even worse. Men with poles had to walk ahead, testing the ground. One bad rut, and the whole procession stalled. And the smells, the smells were something else entirely. Between sweating horses, and damp wool, and open chamber pots. Let's just say, no royal fragrance could quite mask it. Nights on the road, rarely luxurious. Unless a noble offered their estate, the royals stayed in monasteries. Stone walls, low ceilings, simple beds, but the monks lit candles, and heated cider with cloves, and whispered blessings in the halls. The queen would walk the cloister garden after supper, listening to the frogs croak by the fountain, her sleeves trailing in the dew. And the king, he might take counsel by firelight, or write letters by flickering lamp. His handwriting was neat, not elegant, but careful, each stroke with purpose. He often began with "by the grace of God," and ended with "written at such and such abbey by our hand." Simple words, for a very complex life. Sometimes they stopped at manor houses. The richer the lord, the more chaotic the visit. Why? Scrub floors until they glistened. Slaughter geese. Bake tarts. Polish goblets. All for a single night. Royal guests were exhausting. They arrived with musicians, guards, dogs, scribes, clerks, cooks, chamberlains, even jesters sometimes. Not because anyone wanted a joke, but because it was tradition. And tradition in medieval times was not a thing you questioned. Now, let's talk about the royal bed. Yes, they brought it with them. Disassembled and packed into carts. Why? Because sleeping in a stranger's bed? That simply wasn't done. The royal bed was more than furniture. It was a symbol, a space of protection. Carved wood, curtains thick as winter cloaks, pillows stuffed with down, and blankets lined with fur. It took 5 servants to set it up, and 3 to warm it with irons before the royal couple slipped inside. They slept in separate beds, but sometimes in the same chamber, depending on mood and politics. Because even love was never simple, especially not when the crown was involved. In the morning, they'd rise to the sound of bells, not alarm clocks, just church bells, ringing from a nearby tower, and the whole camp would stir. The horses fed, the boots polished, the carriage reins checked, the royal mirror held up once again, hair arranged, a fresh cloak chosen, green for travel through woods, red for days of celebration, black for mourning or mystery. They thought carefully about these things, because people watched, always. Now, let's pause and look at one very strange detail. A peculiar item always packed on royal journeys. A hand-carved portable throne. Yes, a foldable seat. Gold edges, velvet cushion, lion paws at the feet. Why? Because wherever the king sat, that place became the court. Even a field, even a muddy barn. If the throne was there, the law was there. Isn't that odd and wonderful? Sometimes they'd stop in market towns, just for a moment. The royals wouldn't shop, of course, but they'd watch, listen to the noise, the rhythm of buyers and sellers, the clang of a blacksmith, the smell of fresh bread, mixed with manure and smoke. And they'd see people, real people, not bowing courtiers, just wrinkled faces, children chasing geese, women baking in clay ovens. It reminded them what the kingdom was. Not castles, but lives. Little messy, lovely lives. If they traveled by river, that was different. The royal barge was wide and slow. Carved dragons at the front, silk banners that snapped in the breeze. Inside, cushioned benches, a domed canopy, painted with stars, and tiny windows that caught the sunlight just so. On these river days, the queen often smiled more. She liked the water, the soft rocking, the shimmering light, the way fish darted just below the surface. She'd drop crumbs and watch them vanish. And the king, he'd read maps. He loved maps, lines and symbols, imagined places. But even he couldn't always find the roads they were really on. Sometimes, they just drifted. Now, what if someone fell ill on the road? There were royal physicians, herbs packed into satchels, small vials sealed with wax. But healing was uncertain. They believed in humors, balance, hot and cold. So a fever might be treated with cold stones on the chest, or a cut with honey and wool. Strange, yes, but it was what they knew. If someone died, the royal mourning began instantly. Black cloth draped over mirrors, candles burned day and night, and the whole procession might halt for 3 days. 3 days of silence, of psalms whispered at dusk, of bells tolling across the valley. But, more often than not, they kept moving, step by step, cart by cart, village by village, and the land shifted from green fields to dark woods to rocky coastlines. And each turn of the path brought new customs, new dialects, new faces. One village might greet them with garlands, another with fear, another with song. Children would stare, wide-eyed. Men would bow low. Women would whisper blessings or tuck rosemary behind their ears. Every stop was different, and yet somehow always the same. Because the crown traveled like a shadow. It cast itself across the road, not just through presence, but through memory. The stories people told, the ideas they held, the awe in their eyes. Even if the king was weary, even if the queen was quiet, their very appearance stirred something ancient. Hope, maybe, or fear, or simply wonder. Eventually the journey would end. A gate would open, trumpets would call, and the castle walls would rise again. The familiar stone, the echoing halls, the rush of servants, dusting everything back into place. And the royal bed, ah yes, assembled one last time, curtains drawn, fire lit, and quiet. The travel would become a memory, a tapestry of roads and rain, ale and roses, maps and rivers, sighs and bells, all of it sewn together into the strange quilt of royal life. Not grand, not loud, but weird and human. So if your eyes grow heavy now, let them. Let the road stretch on. Let the banners ripple. Let the carriage creak. Let the king murmur in his sleep. Let it all drift, just a little farther down the lane. The candle's low again, and the rain has softened to just a whisper against the shutters. Good. That's just right. Now, close your eyes for a moment, and imagine a royal castle, not its towers, not its banners, but beneath all that, something more private. Something warm, wet, and oddly scented. Yes, tonight we slip quietly into the steamy, flickering world of medieval royal bathing. You might think royalty must have been clean, bathed in perfumes, soaked in herbs, skin soft as velvet, but not quite. Royal bathing was strange, ritualized, rare, and often shared. Let's start not in the tub, but in the calendar. You see, bathing wasn't daily. It wasn't even weekly. Sometimes it was monthly, or timed with the moon, or the feast of a saint. Baths were scheduled like ceremonies. Letters might go out, prepare the bath for His Majesty. This meant days of work. Why? Because the royal bath was not a bathroom. It was an event, a portable room, constructed for the moment, then taken down again. Picture it, a chamber cleared, tapestries hung to catch the warmth, braziers lit to heat the stones. Servants fetch water, bucket by bucket, from the well or cistern, each one carried in trembling arms. Steam rising, aprons soaked. The tub. Oh, it wasn't porcelain. Not yet. It was wooden, lined with linen, sometimes padded with hay underneath to hold heat. Big enough for a king, wide as a wine barrel, round like a small boat, and in it, a seat. Yes, because even royalty didn't sit in the water fully. They perched. Once the water was in, not too hot, not too cold, the king would enter. Not alone usually. No, there would be attendants, towel bearers, physicians, a barber perhaps, even a reader, to recite verses aloud while the king soaked. Because silence was dangerous. If left alone, the king might think. And thinking, for kings, was often political. So there was always someone speaking nearby. Now, what was in the water? Oh, not just soap. Sometimes rosemary, or lavender, or sage, steeped like tea. Sometimes slices of citrus, imported at great cost. Other times, milk. Yes, a bath of warm goat's milk for the skin. And on feast days, wine. A king might soak in diluted wine while listening to psalms. Not quite your average soak. The queen's bath was different, more private. She bathed in a smaller tub, with rose petals scattered across the surface, and her ladies-in-waiting close by. They didn't just help, they gossiped. Braided hair, rubbed perfumed oil on shoulders. It was social, a ritual, not for cleansing alone, but for connection. Now let's talk about the weirdest part. They didn't bathe to remove dirt. They bathed to balance the humors. Yes, water was believed to affect the body's inner state. Too many baths could weaken the bones. Too few invite disease. So a royal bath might be ordered by the court physician, as treatment, not luxury. A bath to calm melancholy. A bath to encourage love. A bath to cure stomach pains. Each one, its own recipe. Water temp, herbs, oils, even the time of day mattered. Morning baths were invigorating. Evening ones, soporific. Now, what happened afterward? The drying. It took several attendants, soft linen cloths, powdered chalk, oils and salves. Feet were dried last, and often kissed. Yes, the king's clean feet were considered sacred, touched only by those closest. A strange gesture, but one of loyalty. The water was not wasted. After the king stepped out, servants used the bath water to clean the floors, or water the garden, or strangely cool bread ovens. Because heat in the Middle Ages was precious. Even used heat. Toilets, that's another odd tale. Royal toilets weren't rooms, they were towers. Often called garderobes. Stone shafts, built over a moat or pit. A wooden bench with a hole. And beneath, well, gravity did the rest. But what made it royal? Curtains, maybe cushions, And in some castles, perfumed herbs tucked into the walls, to mask the scent. Sometimes even falcon feathers were hung near the seat, not for wiping, but for brushing flies away. Now, the king didn't go alone. There was the groom of the stool, yes, a real title, a high-ranking official, whose job was to assist the king's private business. It sounds absurd, but it was one of the most trusted positions in court. Why? Because it was intimate, literal closeness to power. They often became the king's confidants, trusted advisors. Their job began in the toilet and ended in politics. The queen had no such position. Her privacy was more closely guarded, but she too had her attendants. Women who handled linens, oils, dried flowers scattered beneath her bed each morning, to scent the air and ward off illness. Because even smells had meaning. To scent the air and ward off illness. Because even smells had meaning. Cleanliness, in the royal mind, was spiritual. It wasn't about soap, it was about order, about separating filth from grace, about reminding the body of its place in the divine plan. And so, bathing wasn't frequent. But when it happened, it mattered. Candles, prayers, steam, whispers. A strange mix of comfort and ceremony. Sometimes during the bath, the king would ask for music, a lute, a harp, or someone to hum a low winding melody. Not cheerful, just soft, like wind through a tapestry. And he would close his eyes and forget, for a while, that the world was watching. Because the world always watched. Except here, in this wooden tub, under linen drapes, with steam curling like smoke from the surface. Sometimes the royal children bathed too. They splashed more, laughed more, and their nursemaids fretted over every chill, every cough. Rose water was used, and soft cloths, and a lullaby in a tongue older than the kingdom itself. Afterward, the water was drained into the floor grates, or tossed from the windows, or carried out by hand. It wasn't clean, but it was symbolic, and that made all the difference. The scent lingered for hours, of lavender, cedar, ashwood, and warm skin. Sometimes a stray pet would sneak into the room, a gray cat, a sleepy spaniel, drawn to the warmth, and no one shooed them away. They were part of the ritual too. A soft paw on stone, a yawn near the fire. And so the chamber would dim, curtains drawn, oil lamps snuffed, and the tub dismantled, taken back to storage. Until next time. Next moon, next fever, next feast. Because the bath, for royalty, was never just a bath. It was a stage, a sanctuary, a scented sigh in the middle of steel and stone. Something gentle, and strange, and fleeting, like steam rising. Now rest if you like. You've earned it. The fire is low. The bath is empty. The night carries on. Soft, clean, still. The embers are still glowing. Just a little, and the rain has settled into a light tapping. So gentle, you could almost think it was part of the dream. Tonight, we walk slowly down a long stone corridor. It's warm here, and it smells like, spice, and smoke, and something roasting. We're not at a feast, not yet. We're in the royal kitchen, and it's a world of its own. Now you might think, the king's meals were just meat, and more meat. But no. This place, this space beneath the castle, was a buzzing, steaming, shouting labyrinth of strange jobs and stranger rules. It was a place where even the vegetables had politics. So, where do we begin? Let's start with the room itself. Big, really big, far bigger than you'd expect. Tall ceilings, open fire pits, a wall with knives, every shape you can imagine. Hooks, shelves, barrels, spits turning slow. The kitchen staff. Oh, there were dozens. In a royal household, sometimes over 200 people just to feed the court. Yes, cooks, scullions, bakers, roasters, pie makers, even a boy whose only job was to chase mice. They had job titles like turnbroche, the one who turned the roasting spit, lardener, the keeper of fats and grease, and saucerer, a person who just made sauces. At dawn, the kitchen woke up first. Long before the sun, long before the king, the fires had to be stoked, the ovens lit, wood was hauled in, water drawn, the room filled with smoke and footsteps. And in the center was the chief cook. Ah yes, he didn't wear a crown, but down here in the kitchen he ruled. He controlled the supplies, the budget, the menu, and he decided what the king would taste, and what the dogs would eat. Let's look at breakfast. A royal breakfast wasn't grand. Just some bread, maybe a slice of cheese, and ale. Always ale. Because water wasn't safe, and the ale was weak, barely alcoholic. Sometimes a soft egg. Sometimes dried fruit soaked in wine. But nothing too heavy, because the real eating came later. Now the ingredients. That's where things get interesting, because the medieval royal pantry had spices that peasants had never even heard of. Cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves from the Moluccas, nutmeg, pepper. Yes, black pepper. So valuable, it was kept under lock and key. It was measured by the grain, more valuable than gold in some years. They also had things like almond milk, saffron, ginger, dates, imported sugar from the east. A king's table was a spice parade. But not just for flavor. Spices were seen as medicinal. They heated the blood, or cooled it, balanced the humors, prevented plague. At least, that's what they believed. So the kitchen was also a pharmacy. Each dish crafted not just for taste, but for health, symbolism, even mood. Now, let's peek into a typical royal dinner. Not just one course. Oh no. You'd eat in stages, removes, they called them. First, a soup. Then pies. Then roasted swan. Yes, swan. With feathers placed back on after roasting, for decoration. There might be a whole boar's head. Jaws stuffed with herbs. Fish dishes. Egg dishes. And then, sugar. Lots of sugar. Candied everything. Fruits, roots, even flowers. Sugar sculptures. Golden pastries. Sometimes entire edible castles. Yes, the king might have a sugar fortress on a silver plate. And oh, how the courses kept coming. Dozens of dishes, sometimes. Not that everyone ate them all. Most dishes were for display, to show wealth, power, excess. Now let's step behind that, to the real mystery, the tasting ritual. You see, kings feared poison, deeply. So before any bite reached his lips, a servant tasted it first. That servant was trusted, loyal, and often terrified, because one mistake, and everyone could die. The taster would try the wine, wait, breathe, try the meat, wait again. Only when safe did the king eat. And even then, food was cut into bite-sized pieces by another official called the carver. The carver held a knife that was his alone, never shared, never touched. And he trained for years to carve just right. A good slice wasn't just clean, it was elegant, beautiful, like slicing a swan with a blade of silk. Then there were the drinks, ale, of course, wine, imported and sweetened, and mead, fermented honey, sometimes milk, warm and spiced, or water steeped with herbs, calming drinks for the evening, and sometimes ceremonial drinks, like hippocras, a wine mixed with sugar, cinnamon, served at the end of a feast, meant to close the stomach. They believed digestion was sacred. A properly closed stomach slept well, and so did the king. Now, there were diet rules, strict ones. The church had rules about what days you could eat meat, fish days, fasting days, and royal kitchens followed them. But they also found creative workarounds. Dolphins were classified as fish. Beaver tails too, because they were scaly. So, you could eat them on Fridays. Strange, yes. But in the royal kitchen, logic bent around appetite. And here's something weirder. Not everyone ate from plates. The poor used trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread. The food sat right on top, and when you were done, you either ate the bread, or gave it to the servants. Reused bread. Soft with meat juices. Still warm. Kind of unsettling, but maybe comforting too. Now, sometimes, the kitchen staged entertainments. Not jugglers, but food performances. A pie that when cut open, released birds. A roast that spoke, thanks to hidden pipes. Even an entire beast made by sewing different animals together. A pig's head, a goose's wings, a rabbit's feet, cooked, glazed, brought to the table with trumpets. It was food as theater, but the kitchen wasn't all glory. It was hard, dirty, dangerous. Ovens could explode, knives slipped, pots boiled over, and the smoke, always in the eyes. Scullions, lowest of the low, scrubbed pots until their skin cracked. They slept on straw, near the fire, woke before dawn, never touched the food they cooked. And yet, they kept the palace alive, kept the king smiling, or not. depending on how the duck turned out. At night, after the banquet, the kitchen slowed, the fires were doused, knives wiped, floors swept. You'd hear the last pan clatter, a soft laugh, a yawn, then silence. Except for the hiss of coals, and the scent of cinnamon, still clinging to the air. The king would lie in bed, full, drowsy, and somewhere below, in the dark, a boy curled near the hearth, dreaming of sugar castles, and of being chief cook one day.
Maybe. The kitchen may not have worn crowns, but it held the kingdom's belly, its mood, its warmth. It was sacred, steamy, silly, serious, and very, very weird, just like everything else in the royal world.
So rest easy now. The fire's out. The knives are sheathed. The bread's rising, slowly for tomorrow, and the kitchen sleeps, like you should too. Ah, still quiet in the castle, and the stone walls carry the softest echo of a chambermaid's footsteps. But tonight, we aren't entering a throne room, not a banquet hall, not even a chapel. No, we're going somewhere strangely overlooked. A place where no crown is worn, but everything the crown wears is stored. The wardrobe. Now, when you hear wardrobe, you might picture a wooden cabinet, right? Just a big old chest, maybe a mirror. Ah, not here. In medieval royalty, the wardrobe was not a thing. It was a department, yes, an entire branch of royal service, with officers, budgets, records, and hundreds of garments. Let's slowly push open that heavy wooden door, creak, and step inside. Ah, it's warm, very dry. You'd expect dust, but no. It's clean, too clean. The air smells faintly like lavender, wax and cloth. There are rows of clothing, shoes, fabrics, each item wrapped, labeled, sorted with astonishing care. And over in the corner, a man with ink-stained fingers is bent over a scroll. That's the keeper of the wardrobe. He's writing again. Inventory. Every hose, every tunic, every girdle, logged, down to the last thread. You see, this wasn't just about fashion. In medieval royal life, clothing meant power. It meant hierarchy. It told a story, without saying a word. A gold-trimmed sleeve said, "I am untouchable." A crimson robe whispered, "Only the noblest may wear me." And ermine fur, well, that shouted louder than trumpets. But let's look at how the royal clothing really worked. You didn't wake up and just pick something. No, you were dressed by servants, in a ceremony of layers and lace. It was called attiring. The king or queen stood still, as the valet or lady-in-waiting arranged every piece in order. Undergarments, stockings, tied with ribbon, a linen shirt, then tunic, surcoat, cloak, belt. Each part had a ritual, a rhythm, like a slow dance, to dress for the divine. And the materials, oh my, silk, velvet, wool so fine it shimmered, fabrics from Persia, China, Venice, dyes that were worth their weight in gold, Tyrian purple, extracted from thousands of sea snails, indigo, brought across the sea, scarlet made from beetles, and black, so rare, so hard to dye properly. It became a sign of luxury. And furs, ermine, sable, vair, each fur was reserved by law, sumptuary laws they called them. If you weren't of noble birth, you couldn't wear it, not even if you were rich, because clothing. Now let's turn and walk softly to the shoe racks. Shoes were peculiar back then. The royal ones, pointed, curled, stuffed. Yes, stuffed with moss or wool, sometimes perfumed. The longer your shoe, the higher your rank. At one point, toes grew so long they had to be tied to the knee. Imagine walking in that cuck. Gloves were treasures, fringed with pearls, embroidered with gold thread, soaked in rose oil, often gifted, never wasted. The king might give his glove to a knight, not as a joke, but as a command. Gloves were authority, wrapped in linen. And hats. Oh, the hats. You'd think one crown was enough. Ah no, there were coifs, caps, cowls, wimples, pennons, those tall pointy ones like upside-down trumpets. And each hat told a story too. Married, you wore a veil. Widowed, black wool. Engaged, a ribbon pinned just so. The wardrobe knew it all. But you might wonder, where did these clothes go? After the feast? After the war? After the coronation? They weren't thrown out. Oh heavens no. They were recorded, washed with ashes, dried in warm stone rooms, folded, stored, sometimes regifted, sometimes altered. If a prince grew out of his tunic, it might be cut down for a page. If a queen's gown frayed, it became altar cloth. Nothing was wasted. Even worn socks were recycled. And ah, yes, Perfume. Medieval royalty adored scent, but not like today. They didn't dab it on the neck, they sewed it into clothing. Little satchels of herbs, ribbons soaked in jasmine, linings of violet water. Because bathing was rare, so clothing carried the freshness, and the perfume became part of the identity. Here's something even weirder. Sometimes clothes were cursed. Yes, cursed. Whispers of poison sewn into the hem, or holy relics stitched in secret. Even enchanted belts, meant to protect from illness. The wardrobe had to guard not just against moths, but magic. In fact, they kept a book of wardrobe, an enormous ledger, every item listed, down to the shoelaces. You could flip to a page and find one green tunic, stitched with lions, worn by the prince at the feast of St. Michael. Dates, events, alterations. Clothing was history, woven in wool. But not just clothing. The wardrobe also kept jewels, crowns, chains, rings. Some items locked in boxes within boxes, with 3 keys held by 3 different men. None could open it alone. And when the crown jewels were moved, they marched under guard. Even the chainmail had a page in the ledger. Even the king's nightshirt. Yes, he had one made of silk, lined with rabbit fur. Now let's peek behind the curtain, literally, because the royal bed was part of the wardrobe's concern. The hangings, the covers, the embroidery, all designed to reflect nobility, even in sleep. Purple velvet for winter, white linen for spring, gold trim on feast days. Even the pillows were monogrammed. You didn't just sleep as a king, you looked like one, even with your eyes closed. And what about travel? When the king moved, so did the wardrobe. A rolling trunk of fashion and function, clothing for every weather, every ceremony, packed by hand, sometimes 40 or more trunks, with special oxen just to carry them. A movable closet of majesty. There's even a tale of a poor valet who packed the wrong cloak, gave the king a hunting outfit on the day of a French ambassador's arrival. The shame, unthinkable. He was dismissed before nightfall. In royalty, a sleeve could start a scandal. And now we reach the royal armor. Yes, that too was stored and maintained by the wardrobe. Because armor wasn't just protection, it was decoration. Filigree on the breastplate, etched lions on the gauntlets, plumes on the helmet. Armor was clothing made of metal, polished until it gleamed like mirrors, hung on padded stands, waiting for war or parade. So we close the door again. Gently, behind us the keeper continues his notes, and the silence falls once more over fabric and fur. The clothing rests, waiting to dress the crown again. Funny, isn't it? The sword gets the glory, but the cloak, it whispers history, with every fold, every seam, every scent. And the wardrobe, well, it's a kingdom of its own. You're still here, that's good. You're calm now, just like the linen, just like the silk hanging quietly on the wall, waiting for dawn. It's quiet again, very quiet. The castle's lights flicker softly, just candles now. The torch outside fades, and somewhere, far below, a monk's chant echoes faintly in the cold stone chapel. Tonight, we drift beyond the throne, beyond the war rooms, beyond the kitchens and wardrobes. We are entering the most hidden part of royal life, a part never spoken aloud, whispered behind tapestries. Tonight, we step into the royal superstitions. Yes, you'd think a king had no fears. You'd think a queen needed no charms. But you'd be wrong. Even the mightiest feared the unseen. And so we begin. In the bedchamber, before dawn, the queen is still asleep, her hand resting beneath her pillow. But under that pillow, a small pouch. Inside, saint's bones. Yes, tiny brittle pieces of bone wrapped in silk. A relic. Why? Because it was believed to ward off nightmares. And not just bad dreams. They believed dreams were portals. To the divine. To the demonic. To death itself. That's why no royal bed was made without holy protection. Sometimes stitched into the sheets. Sometimes burned as incense. Sometimes whispered, just before sleep. A prayer so soft, even the candle didn't flicker. Now let's follow the king. He's not in bed. He's in the chapel. Alone. Before battle. Before marriage. Before anything grand. He lights a candle. Not just for faith, but for luck. Because kings had omens, and they watched them. If a raven flew east, good. If it circled, bad. If your horse neighed during your coronation, start praying. There were even people in court who watched the skies, the animals, the air itself. They were called augurs, and when they spoke, kings listened, sometimes more than to their generals, sometimes more than to their god. Now, let's peek inside the queen's jewelry box. Among gold and emeralds, you'll find a strange little object, a ring, plain, dull, not made to shine, made to protect. It's a talisman, maybe set with jet, maybe amber, maybe even a drop of blood sealed in glass. Because queens were taught from a young age, you wear beauty for power, but you wear charms to survive. Now, let's wander to the nursery. There's a cradle, a nurse hums softly, but next to the crib, a bundle of dried herbs, hung from the rafters, smells like rosemary and rue. Why? To keep away spirits, especially the ones called changelings. It was believed that fairies, or demons, could steal royal babies, replace them with imposters, so the cradle was guarded, with charms, with fire, with song, and sometimes, with iron cold, heavy placed at the foot of the crib. Iron was said to burn anything unholy. Even crowns had their rituals. Before a coronation, the royal crown was never placed directly on the head. First it was laid at the altar, for hours, to cleanse it, to purify it, to charge it, because if you placed a crown on a sinful head, they believed it could curse the whole realm. Yes, the crown had to be holy and heavy, heavier than most imagined, not just in gold, but in meaning. Sometimes royalty refused to wear it, even in private, because they feared the weight might bring misfortune. Let's visit the dining hall again. We've been here before, but tonight, something's different. The king has a private cup, silver, always tested before he drinks, but not just for poison. Oh no, a gemstone is embedded in the goblet's rim. Why? It was believed that some stones could scream, or change color, if poison touched them, especially stones like agate, amethyst, or coral. Superstition, maybe, but no one dared drink from the king's cup without his permission, not even his brother. And here's something even stranger. Royal families often hid their left shoes. Yes, one would be placed on the roof, another buried under the castle's steps. Why? Because shoes, they said, remembered your shape, they held your soul's imprint, and hiding them protected you from witches. Witchcraft was feared, deeply, and kings, despite all their might, believed they too could fall under a spell, and so they carried little tokens, tiny knives with runes, crystals, even dried frogs, sealed in wax. Disgusting, maybe, but protection came in strange forms. Let's step into the royal chapel again, just for a moment. Candles are low now. A priest walks slowly, murmuring Latin. But behind the altar, there's something very few ever see. The Book of Omens. It's not scripture. It's a collection of dreams, of disasters, of births, and comets, and battles. Each entry links a royal event, to the sky, to the stars, to shadows. Kings read it quietly, in times of fear, and queens sometimes cried over it, because in it, they saw what might come. And sometimes that was worse than anything real. Let's rest for a moment. You've noticed, haven't you? Royalty wasn't just about power, it was about fear. A fear dressed in silk, crowned in gold, wrapped in lavender, and garlic. Yes, garlic too, hung above doorways, worn in pouches, even rubbed on horses' hooves. Not to ward off disease, to ward off curses. Do you remember the royal wardrobe? The cloaks? The gloves? Well, many of them had symbols sewn inside. Eyes, crosses, knots. Some said the knots trapped demons. Others said the symbols made the wearer invisible. Not to people, but to spirits. And yet, despite all this, they ruled. Every day, they smiled, they bowed, they walked among crowds, while under their robes, beneath their jewels, they hid their fears, with rosemary, and relics, and whispered prayers. So now, let's quietly close this chapter. Let the royal fears fade into candlelight. Let the talismans sleep. Let the rings and relics rest. For even the most powerful souls need silence, and a charm, to keep the night away. And maybe, so do we. So, where were we? The halls are still. The superstitions have quieted. The talismans, tucked gently beneath silk pillows, now lie undisturbed. But wait. Something strange. Do you smell that? It's not the kitchen's herbs. Not lavender from the queen's sachets. Not the damp stone of the corridor. It's something sharper. Something darker. Ink. Tonight, we visit a part of royalty few have seen. The room where secrets were written. We're stepping into the royal scribe's chamber. A quiet little room, tucked beneath the chapel stairs, or hidden in a narrow turret, lit only by a thin slit of light in the wall. No tapestries, no gold, just parchment ink, and silence. You might think that royalty didn't write. Ah, but they did. Letters, secret codes, prayers, curses, dreams. Many never meant to be read aloud. Let's go in. You hear it first. The scratch of quill on vellum. Sishik, sishik. It's calming, like wind through reeds. The scribe is there, his fingers stained with soot-black ink. He's hunched over a thick book, copying, line after line. But what he writes, it's not poetry, it's not history, it's the royal accounts. And oh, they are strange. Did you know that every plum bought for the queen, every ounce of wax for the king's beard, was recorded? Yes, and not just in numbers, but in ritualistic detail. Because if the accounts were wrong, if something didn't balance, it was believed to bring bad fortune. Sometimes scribes even slept with the ledgers, as if holding the kingdom's math close would protect the crown. Let's look closer. There's another book. Not for taxes, not for food. This one is bound in black leather. It's called the Royal Book of Dreams. Yes, dreams. Because royal dreams were seen as messages from heaven or hell, and scribes were taught to write them, word for word, as whispered by the king himself, still groggy from sleep. 3 white birds over a red tree. Fire beneath the throne, teeth falling into sand. Then the dream would be interpreted. Ah, a white bird meant betrayal. Fire meant war. Teeth? A death in the family. Sometimes the scribes refused to write them down. Too dangerous. Too truthful. They'd pretend to mishear, or spill ink by accident. Royal ink. It wasn't like ours. Some inks were made with wine, some with blood, some with crushed beetles, boiled down to make vermilion red. Ah, and that red was used only for curses. Yes, royalty wrote curses too, but not the way you think. They didn't yell, they didn't strike, they wrote slowly, calmly, like a spell. I name thee, wither under moonlight. I bind thy tongue with iron and fog. Some of these curses were hidden inside books, between the lines, in invisible ink made of lemon juice or urine, seen only with flame. And what's stranger, sometimes the king didn't write them. The queen did, in the margins of her psalter, next to drawings of saints. Odd, isn't it? Even in holiness, there's a little fear. Now, let's sit. Yes, just there, beside that stack of rolled parchment. See the wax seals, each one pressed with the royal signet. Not just for show, but for power. It was believed, the moment that wax cooled, the message became fate. It couldn't be undone. Letters to popes, orders for execution, invitations to a feast, sealed, sent, done. Sometimes scribes cried while sealing them, because they knew the words inside would change someone's life, forever. Now let's glance out the narrow window. Do you see that small group of horses leaving the gates? They carry messages, some carried on silk, others tattooed onto the scalp of a bald courier. Yes, he would shave his head, have the message inked onto his skin, then let his hair grow back. Only the king knew. Until, weeks later, the head was shaved again. The words revealed. It's strange, almost poetic. Royalty, hiding messages in skin. Now back to the chamber. Look, that little chest. It's full of quills. But also, something stranger. Tiny bells. Why? Because when the king wrote something important, the bell would be rung, to announce the moment. 1 chime meant joy. 2 meant secrecy. 3 meant death. Imagine a hall falling silent, at 3 soft chimes. Though not everything written was dark. Some scribes copied music, and poetry, and yes, even lullabies, for royal children. There's one, written in the queen's hand. Soft wobbly letters. Sleep, my silver star. The candle hums afar. The castle dreams in stone and moss. Sleep now, little heart, be lost. Sometimes, even kings wrote lullabies. Alone, late, with trembling hands. Because even kings wanted their children to sleep, to be safe, to dream of nothing at all. Ah, we should whisper now. There's one more thing in this room. It's not on paper, not in ink. It's carved into the wall, just behind the door. A single sentence, written by a scribe no one remembers. It says, "The pen is quiet, but never blind." What did he see? Maybe too much. Maybe that's why the door was sealed, for many years. They feared what had been written. Let the parchments curl. Let the red wax crackle in the candlelight. For this was the room of words, of secrets, of silent truths, written by calm hands, in quiet halls, beneath the weight of kings and queens. And now, it's silent again. Let's step away, and listen to the ink settle. Ah, it's quiet now. The quills have stopped scratching. The scribes are asleep, or maybe listening, behind old wooden doors. And yet, even deeper in the castle, past the halls and towers, and kitchens and crypts, there's still something stranger. Yes, stranger than curses written in blood, stranger than powdered beetle ink. Tonight, we visit the royal pets. Yes, you may have heard of royal horses, the hounds, maybe a hawk or two. But, did you know that medieval royalty kept animals for reasons far more peculiar? Ah, not always for hunting, not just for display. Sometimes, for healing, for dreams, for superstition, and, sometimes just for very, very strange companionship. Let's step softly now. We're in the Queen's private chambers. And do you see? Just there on the silken cushion. A monkey. Yes, not a drawing, not a statue. A real one. Tiny, nervous, wearing a beaded collar. Sometimes a velvet coat, made by hand. He's called Peepo. The Queen says he understands sadness. And maybe he does. He eats only raisins, and looks out the window like he's remembering another life. Monkeys weren't uncommon for royals, but not everyone approved. Some clergy said they were demons in disguise. Others said they were protectors. If a monkey screamed in the night, it meant danger was close. So, queens began listening to them, more than their guards. Some even whispered to them before bed. Little secrets, little fears. A monkey as a diary. Now follow me, down the corridor. Careful, don't step on the straw. This part smells, earthy. That's because here, in this side chamber, we find something unexpected. A tortoise. Yes, the king's tortoise. He called it Sir Balthazar. He believed the creature held ancient wisdom. Why? Because it never rushed. It never panicked. It just kept going. And so, before battles, the king would watch Sir Balthazar eat lettuce. And only after the last bite would he give the order to march. Let's keep walking. What's that sound? A flutter. Look up. Yes, inside the tower chamber. A whole flock of royal pigeons. Not messengers. Not for war. These were dream birds. Their feathers dyed with crushed flowers, blue and lavender. They were believed to carry away bad dreams. So at night, the princess would open the window, whisper her nightmare, and release one pigeon. Off it flew, taking the dream with it. Odd, isn't it? Royalty, with all their riches, still needing help sleeping. Just like us. There's another pet. You might not believe this. A lion. Yes, a real one. Kept by a northern king, in a stone courtyard. But not as a threat, as a symbol. He never chained it. Instead, he'd walk near it, speak to it, and when the lion would lie down beside him, he believed it meant his enemies would fall. It died in winter, and the king wept so long that his physicians ordered leeches to drain the grief. Let's not stay there too long. Too heavy. Come now, we'll visit something gentler. A secret room, just behind the great hall, lined with small baskets and moss. This is the nursery of mice. You see, the queen loved them. She'd feed them almonds, name them after stars, and when they died, because mice do so quickly, she'd wrap them in silk, and bury them in the chapel garden. Each had a name carved in a stone. Orion, Little Luna, Starling, Velvet. Yes, some called it madness, but others said, it made her kinder. The king's brother. He kept a beetle. Yes, a single beetle, inside a small walnut shell, punched with air holes. He believed it was a saint, reborn. He'd talk to it, sing to it. Once, it vanished. He ordered the whole castle searched. Everyone thought it ridiculous. But when they found the shell, in the folds of a tapestry, he held it to his lips and wept. Even stranger, there were cats. Of course there were cats, but not like you think. These cats wore little bells, were fed from golden bowls, and some were given titles. One queen's cat was called Duchess Mew of Featherhall. She had a crown, and a cushion, and a portrait, hung beside the queen's own. Sometimes pets were blamed. A rooster's strange cry, A warning from beyond. A hound's howl. The ghost of a dead knight. One monkey was blamed for a whole war. They said it stared at a visiting noble too long. The noble got offended, and the insult spread. That poor monkey was sent away to a monastery, where monks said it began to copy their prayers, and once bowed. There were owls too, but not caged. They'd perch in rafters, fly through halls, and the royals believed. They whispered to the dead. At night, they were feared, but also respected. One king said, "If the owl calls your name, write your will." So some guests refused to stay overnight, just in case. Let's rest here now, by the sunlit edge of the garden wall. Do you hear that humming? Bees, royal bees. Their hive was carved into a statue of a saint. And every morning, honey was taken with ceremony. But not for eating, for healing. And once, for writing a peace treaty. Yes, the ink was mixed with royal honey, to sweeten the words, they said. So strange. Pets not just for comfort, but for omens, for warnings, for guidance. In palaces of marble and gold, among crowns and candles, and silence, it was often the smallest creatures. A mouse, a beetle, a pigeon, that carried the weight of royal peace. So let's leave them now. Let them sleep. Let the bees buzz. Let the cats stretch. And may we too find a quiet place to rest our thoughts, as the moon rises above the tower, and the little monkey curls into sleep. You've probably heard of medieval feasts. Yes. The golden goblets, roasted boars, platters big enough to sleep on. But what about when royalty couldn't eat? Not wouldn't, not didn't want to, but simply couldn't. Tonight, we enter the strange, strict, and utterly odd world of royal diets and fasting rituals. Yes, food, or the absence of it, controlled by rules older than any crown, and sometimes stranger than any curse. Let's start softly. The king is seated, still, thinking. Not of war, not of land, but of lentils. Why? Because it's the 40th day before Easter, and this means fasting. Not just any fasting, royal fasting. Not quite starvation, but not comfort either. No meats, no dairy, no eggs, sometimes not even fish. Just plants, porridge, a spoonful of peas perhaps. Even the king must obey. Now you may think, couldn't he cheat? Maybe. But here's the catch. Everyone was watching. The court, the clergy, the cooks, the visiting nobles. Breaking a fast wasn't just a sin, it was a scandal. Imagine, the king sneaks a bit of roast goose, and the story spreads faster than wildfire. So they got creative. Let's step into the royal kitchen, shall we? Smells different, doesn't it? No roast, no gravy, just broth, herbs, a hint of something sweet. This was the domain of the fasting cooks. Men and women trained in the art of making nothing taste like something. Bread, soaked in almond milk, turnips, carved like meat, even fish that had never touched water. How? Eel-shaped pastries, stuffed with sweetened beans. Fasting illusions, little edible lies. There were rules, so many rules. Like, whether beavers counted as fish. Yes, you heard that right. The church once ruled. The beaver tail was so fish-like in texture that it could be eaten on fasting days. So, beaver tail stew became royal delicacy. Weird? Yes, but legal. Now let's move beyond fasting, into the world of spiritual eating. There were queens who refused food for days, not because of religion, but because they believed it made their visions clearer. They said that hunger opened the heavens, that bread blocked the divine. One such queen ate only rose petals and water for a week. She claimed it made her dreams more vivid. Another drank nothing but dew, gathered from sacred stone at dawn. Of course, physicians were concerned, but what could they do? To accuse a queen of madness was dangerous. So instead, they recorded it all, wrote detailed notes. The queen refused bread again today. She stared at the sun for an hour. She wept while touching a pigeon. There were kings, obsessed with purity. They believed certain foods made the soul heavy, so they avoided onions, garlic, red berries. One king refused salt, claimed it attracted demons. Another refused water, unless it came from a spring blessed by monks. Now come with me, to the royal cellar. See the rows of barrels. Yes, most were wine, but not all. Some held special brews, liquids boiled with dried lavender, crushed sapphire, even powdered pearls. Drunk before battle, or before confession, or before sleep. They believed certain drinks aligned the body with the stars, a kind of cosmic digestion. Sometimes food was power. A queen once ordered 24 different dishes served to her visiting cousin, then sat and ate none of them. She said she was fasting for the peace of her soul, but everyone knew she simply wanted her cousin to feel small. Royal fasting, as politics. And then there were feasts, where only one person ate. Strange, no? An entire hall full of guests, but only the king eats. This was called solemn nourishment. It symbolized how the kingdom depended on him. All eyes watched him chew, slowly, quietly, and when he sipped wine, everyone sighed in relief, like the sun had risen. Other times, eating was a punishment. A prince once disobeyed a fast day, so the king forced him to eat only raw oats. For a week, he said, "A beast eats without thought, so you will eat like a beast." They said the boy never touched meat again. In contrast, there were kings who ate with extreme devotion. They prayed between bites. They wouldn't eat unless they had washed their hands 3 times. And the bread, always broken, never cut. Because slicing bread was seen as slicing the body of Christ. Let's visit the monks who served the royal kitchen. These weren't ordinary cooks. They wore robes, carried herbs like relics. They believed each ingredient had a soul. That rosemary whispered protection. That sage could cure betrayal. And once, they served a cake laced with powdered scripture. Yes, actual scripture, rolled in honey, and baked into the crust. The queen said it helped her sleep. There were times of grief, when food became ritual. After a death in the royal family, the entire court would eat only black bread and bitter greens for 7 days. No seasoning, no sweetness. It was called the mourner's diet. And if someone was caught sneaking sweets, they were made to fast in public, eyes watching, bells ringing. And weddings. Food was everywhere. But sometimes the bride and groom would not eat at all during the celebration. They would fast to show they entered marriage with pure spirits. Later that night, they would break the fast alone, in a private room, with just bread, honey, and rose water. It was called the Quiet Supper. There were even magical diets. A knight once claimed he saw angels when he drank nothing but goat's milk for 30 days. A princess refused solid food for a season, claimed she became lighter, felt herself float in prayer. Delusion, maybe. But in those stone halls, where belief ruled stronger than law, who could say? So when we think of medieval royalty, dining in luxury, sometimes, yes, but often, they were bound by rules more rigid than any chain. Fasting for virtue, eating for power, drinking for dreams, and always watched, always judged, even by their own stomachs. Let's end here tonight. The hall is quiet. The table is bare. A single candle flickers beside a bowl of lentils. The king sits, hands folded, waiting for sunrise, because only then may he eat. Softly now. Do you feel the cold? We're going underground tonight. Past the courtyards, past the kitchens, past even the royal chapel, down into the dark, into the royal dungeons and secret punishments. Not a cheerful topic, perhaps. But here, we're not focused on screams or shackles. No, we'll focus instead on the strange, the rules, the rituals, the absurdity of how royalty punished and feared the very idea of punishment. Let's begin with a strange door, heavy, wood-bound, always locked, but behind it, not chains, no, books. This is the punishment library. Strange, yes, but in one royal court, a disobedient noble was sentenced to read. He had offended the queen with a crude joke, so she declared, "He lacks refinement. Let him learn it." They locked him in a room filled with poetry and philosophy. 3 meals a day, a feather mattress, and a guard who asked daily, "What have you read today, my lord?" He emerged quiet, pale, muttering Latin. Some say it worked. Others say he simply grew afraid of metaphors. Further down, let's step into a small chamber. No windows. 1 chair, a small table. On it, a mirror. This was called the room of reflection, used for royal children and overly proud courtiers. They were placed inside with only one item, their own portrait, and were told, "Stare at yourself until you see truth." Odd punishment, but one that reportedly shook even the boldest knights. Some came out weeping, others laughing. One refused to speak ever again. Now let's walk deeper. Careful, The stones here are slick. This passage leads to the Chamber of Sounds. No torture here, just noise. All day and night. Bells, whispers, distant laughter, played by hidden musicians, reflected in the curves of the stone. This punishment was for liars. The idea confused their sense of self. One lord claimed he heard his dead father's voice telling him to confess. So he did. Now up these steps, to something peculiar. An open-air cell. No roof, just sky, rain, snow, sun, birds. This was the cage of heaven, reserved for blasphemers. Those who mocked the church, or worse, claimed they could see angels. Here they were left with bread, water, and a painted cross. No shade. They said that if they truly had heavenly visions, the sky would comfort them. One woman, sentenced for heresy, reportedly smiled for 7 days straight, until they released her. Said they were too frightened to continue. Let's pause here. In this round cell, it's empty now. But once, it held a jester. He had insulted a visiting prince. So the punishment? To perform for no one. Every night, he'd be escorted here by guards. He'd dance, tell jokes, juggle, to silence. It broke him faster than chains. When finally released, he whispered, "Laughter is heavier when it's alone." Now let's peek behind this rusted gate. This was the Hall of Shadows. No windows, no torches. The floor, blackened. Here, punishment was anonymity. The worst thing for a noble, worse than pain, was to be forgotten. So they were made to live here, masked, unnamed, untouched. No one spoke to them. No one acknowledged them. They were ghosts among the living. A count once spent 30 days here. When he returned, he bowed to every candle, mistaking them for people. Now let's turn to the punishment of the feathered cloak. An odd one. Used on liars and boasters. The guilty party was made to wear a robe, stitched with goose feathers. And wherever they walked in the castle, children were told to laugh. It was meant to shame, but gently. The cloak rustled with every step. The wearer was never alone. The sound followed them. They said the weight wasn't physical, but emotional. When the cloak was removed, some still heard the rustling. Let's take a breath now. We're nearing the most secret punishment of all. It wasn't loud, or painful, or even visible. It was called the silent bell. No one knows when it began, but once a year, a bell was placed outside a noble's chamber, unrung, untouched. Just there. It meant you are being watched. Nothing more. No trial, no accusation, just implication. Some broke under the silence. Others rang the bell themselves to confess anything, just to end it. What strange power silence has. Sometimes royalty punished themselves. One queen, after a dream of divine judgment, built a small cell in her garden. Each week she sat inside for 1 hour, wearing a veil, refusing to speak. When asked why, she said, "Even the crown must remember humility." Now walk with me back up. The air is warmer here. The punishments, not so strange perhaps. They reflect something very human. The fear of shame, the longing to be seen, or not seen, the ache of silence, the confusion of mirrors, and the heavy weight of being watched. We'll end here, by a small iron door, closed now. Its handle cold, a plaque reads, "Oblivio." It was never opened, because the greatest punishment of all was the threat that something lay beyond it, that something worse might come, and no one knew what. That was enough, and so it remained sealed, as it is tonight, quiet, waiting, heavy with fear and mystery. Let's step back into the warmth, leave the strange rituals behind. The candle still burns, and perhaps no one is watching us now. Let's settle in. Tonight, the air feels a little strange, doesn't it? Like something's watching. Or maybe, just maybe, the wind is carrying stories again.
Did you know that medieval royalty, kings, queens, even mighty emperors believed in the oddest things? Little signs, symbols, sounds. They feared shadows, birds, shoes placed the wrong way. Yes, really, let's explore what they believed, and how far they'd go to please luck and avoid fate. Let's begin with a king. He ruled peacefully, but he never sat on his throne without placing a toadstone beneath it. What's a toadstone? Well, it was believed to come from the head of a living toad. It supposedly glowed and protected against poison. Every morning a servant would check under the throne, mutter a small chant, and nod. The stone still shines. That was enough for the king to begin the day. Now imagine a queen, in her royal chambers. She won't leave her bed until a white dog walks past her doorway. Every morning her ladies-in-waiting would whisper, "Where is Snowbell?" This little dog had no idea it was guiding the queen's fate, but without it, the queen would remain under the covers. Once Snowbell got lost, the court paused. No scrolls signed, no audience granted. Everything stopped, until the fluffy creature returned.
Such power in such little paws. And what about hair? Oh yes, the royals believed that cutting hair could change the soul, especially on the wrong day. So barbers, royal ones, carried calendars soaked in moonlight. They refused to trim locks when the moon was full. Too much energy, they said. Hair cut under a full moon might carry away your thoughts, or invite strange dreams.
Ah, and so the royal hair remained long, flowing, and occasionally very, very tangled.
Now come with me, into the royal kitchen. There's a pot boiling, but beside it, a small wooden spoon dipped in salt, placed pointing east. Why? Because the royal cook believed food tasted better if stirred with sun-aligned salt. He'd whisper, "A pinch for flavor, a pinch for favor." If the soup spoiled, he blamed the stars. Some nights he stirred broth for hours, waiting for the right wind to enter the kitchen. And when the king loved his meal, the cook said, "The wind smiled tonight." And oh, the shoes. Never place a royal shoe upside down. It was said to invite demons. One duke ordered shoes to be stored on tiny velvet shelves, always facing north. Once a servant forgot. The duke fell from his horse that very day. He limped for months, and the shoes were burned. From that moment no shoe in his castle ever faced south again. Sometimes, it's not the crown that holds power, but what's beneath it. Let's wander into the nursery. Here, a royal baby sleeps, but beneath the pillow, a small pouch of moss, lavender, and a crow feather. Why? To keep away dreams of betrayal. Yes, betrayal. Even babies, they believed, could have visions, so the pouch was placed each night, always turned 3 times before sleeping. Once, a nursemaid forgot. The baby cried all night. The next day, the king ordered the pouch to be blessed by a monk, and so it was. 3 times, every month, forever. Now listen. Do you hear that bell? Ding, ding. That's the hour of silence. Royal families believed that every 7th hour was sacred to silence. No one spoke, no doors opened. Even birds were chased from windows. Why? Because during that hour fate was said to walk through the palace. Anyone who interrupted it risked changing their future. One young prince dared to speak during the hour once. He stubbed his toe. And that, they said, was fate's warning. Now let's pause here. There's a portrait of a queen smiling oddly. If you look closely, her fingers are crossed. This wasn't just a pose. She believed that every time someone painted her, they captured a bit of her soul, so she crossed her fingers to knot it shut. Before each portrait session, she'd whisper, "Paint my image, not myself." And when the painting was finished, she'd place a flower in front of it and bow, just in case. Even brush strokes felt like magic. In the palace gardens, there were trees never trimmed. Why? Because one king believed the spirits of his ancestors lived in them. If a branch blocked a walkway, they moved the walkway. If leaves entered the ballroom, they danced around them. Once a guest broke a twig from one tree. The king turned pale. The feast ended early, and the guest was never seen again. They say he left quietly, or maybe the tree took him back. Now follow me into the royal bathroom. Yes, even here, superstition. The queen only bathed on days ending in 3. She said the number made her feel clean on the inside, and her bathtub was always filled with water collected from the east, drawn before sunrise. If the sun had risen, they poured it out. Why? Because the water had witnessed too much, they said. Cleanliness, it seems, had its own rituals. Let's sit here a moment. Feel that breeze? That's the northern wind. It was believed that if a noble heard this wind just before making a decision, they must wait a day. A royal general once ignored it and lost a battle. After that, they placed wind chimes in every corridor. If they rang, decisions paused. And now at last, the oddest one of all. A superstition held by a lonely prince. Each night, he placed a silver coin under his pillow. Not for wealth, but because he believed that dreams cost something. He said dreams should never be free. That's how nightmares sneak in. When he had good dreams, he left the coin. When bad dreams came, he buried it in the garden. The garden, they said, grew strange. The flowers never bloomed straight. What a curious life. Even in wealth, power, and gold, fear crept in through the smallest crack. A spoon facing the wrong way. a whisper at the wrong hour, a painting that smiled too much. But perhaps there's comfort here too. Because these kings and queens beneath all the silk and crowns were just like us. They feared bad dreams. They hoped for luck. They clutched trinkets and watched the moon. They believed that small things mattered. And maybe in a world of chaos, that's how they kept their world together. One superstition at a time. Good night, dear listener. Let's rest our thoughts here, in the quiet between the wind and the dreams.
The weird life of royalty in medieval times. Tonight, we drift softly into a part of royal life that was never meant to be spoken aloud. Yet, it lingered in every corridor, beneath every banquet table, behind every tapestry.
Let's open the hush-hinged door to something curious. The secrets of royal servants. You see, royalty may have worn crowns, but they weren't alone in their world. They were watched, dressed, fed, advised, spied upon, followed, whispered about, always, by the eyes of those who served them. The cooks, the scribes, the bedwarmers, the torchbearers, the jesters, the nannies, the falcon boys. These weren't just helpers. They were the invisible gears of royal life. And yet, they knew everything. Let's go deeper. Imagine a small, quiet boy, no older than 8, dressed in velvet and dust, holding a candle. That's the night tapper. He didn't speak. He simply tapped the doors of nobles when it was time to wake. But sometimes, he lingered outside a room, listened, watched. He knew who argued, who snuck in, who left crying. Years later, he became a keeper of secrets, a walking diary in slippers. And when he vanished one winter, they say 3 nobles were never the same again. Now, step into the grand kitchen. Feel that wave of heat, steam, and clattering ladles. But beyond the boiling pots, there's a man, quietly placing rose petals in a stew. Not for flavor, but to calm the queen's nerves. She'd never see him, never thank him. Yet, he knew when her moods shifted by the color of her napkin. Pink, happy, ivory, worried, dark red, dangerous. He kept her balanced, through petals and pepper, and careful, soothing broth. Sometimes the chef knew the queen better than her own husband. Now, the taster. Ah yes, the royal taster. A man who took tiny bites, sips from every dish before it touched royal lips. But what no one told you was that he didn't fear poison. No, he feared getting it wrong. Too salty? Too cold? Too sweet. When the king had a headache, a sigh from the throne could seal his fate. So he prayed before each bite, not for life, but for flavor. Down the hall, a woman kneels beside a window. This is the window wiper. Her job? To clear the stained glass of smudges each morning, just before sunrise. Why? Because the king liked to see the first light pass through unclouded saints. She worked in silence, but she knew when a royal was unwell, because the morning light would be replaced by candlelight. She never asked. She just cleaned, and left tulip petals on the sill. A soft gesture. Soft, like silence. Now, let's step inside the wardrobe chamber. So many silks, so many buttons, but there's someone crouched in the corner. That's the smell sniffer. Yes, truly, their job, to smell the garments for mildew, sweat, or dust before the king dressed. They had the sharpest noses in court. Once a prince nearly wore a cloak that had been stored with moth leaves. The sniffer caught the scent, saved the prince from 3 days of itching. He was rewarded with a fruit tart. Let's wander into the nursery. There, in a corner, a woman rocks slowly, the dream hummer. She didn't sing lullabies. She hummed in patterns. Soft, repetitive, like breathing. It was believed that her hum kept bad spirits away from the royal cradle. The baby slept deeply, and when the child had nightmares, the hummer changed her tune, and sometimes, just sometimes, the queen asked her to hum outside her door. Even queens needed comforting. Now, the fire whisperer. This servant sat beside the hearth. Always. He never spoke to anyone, except the flames. He told the fire the secrets of the court. He believed the flames took the weight of the lies and burned them into ash. Sometimes the fire cracked loudly. The nobles would pause. Was it approval or anger? The fire whisperer would nod or shake his head, and the king would continue. The crackles were enough. Come now, to the stables. There's a girl brushing the mane of a white horse. She doesn't wear royal colors. But every day she whispers to the stallion, "You're carrying the crown." That's because she believes the horse hears more confessions than the priest. And truly, the prince often visited this horse to cry, or to rant. The girl never repeated a word, she just braided the mane tighter, so the secrets wouldn't fall out. Let's move to a shadowed hallway now. See that man wiping the floor with cloth gloves? That's the echo catcher. He believed footsteps carried words, so he polished the stone slowly, catching the sounds. Once he heard the same noble walk by 4 times in the same hour. Too fast, too frantic, he told a guard. That noble was caught trying to flee with stolen letters. The echo catcher just smiled and continued polishing. In the library, a quiet old woman replaces books. She's the bookmarker. Her role is strange. She slides silk between pages that contain dangerous ideas. She chooses which books the royals will finish, and which they'll forget. She once hid an entire chapter on rebellion beneath a blank page. The king read it, and thought it ended in peace. He slept better that night, and never knew. In the chapel there's a boy who lights the candles, but he always lights the one closest to the window last. Why? Because he believes that one speaks to the sky, and should hear the others first. The priest smiles, but never stops him. Sometimes, superstition and love look the same. Let's end tonight's journey with a girl who waters the queen's roses. Each petal is perfect, but what she knows, and no one else does, is this. Every time the queen cries, a new rose blooms. And sometimes, the girl sees more roses than expected. She whispers to them, I know. Then gently, she picks the thorns first, so the queen won't bleed. Ah, you see now. While royalty wore crowns, it was the servants who held the strings. Invisible, loyal, clever, gentle. They hummed the lullabies, caught the echoes, watched the moon, and carried the weight of secrets no gold could buy. So tonight, if you sleep beside candlelight, or hear footsteps on stone, maybe, just maybe, one of them is still around, still listening, still serving. Sleep gently now. Their watch is never truly over. The weird life of royalty in medieval times. Let's continue. Tonight, we sink into a quiet but powerful corner of royal life. A place where things were never quite said aloud, but always felt. You know what I mean, right? This time, we aren't following a king, or a crown, or even a court. No, tonight, we are following a pet. Yes, a royal animal. Because behind every royal feast, parade, or cold winter night, there was a pair of watchful eyes, not human, but just as loyal. Welcome to the strange, spoiled, and secret lives of royal animals. Now, close your eyes and imagine. A soft, chubby lapdog curled beneath a velvet train, its fur brushed with crushed rose petals. Its meals made of chopped lamb and honey. Its name, Saint Pomfrey. The queen whispered her worries to him. She believed he kept her secrets. And perhaps he did. He wore a collar of silver. He had his own pillow. And once, he was given a tiny crown, just for fun. But Pomfrey wasn't the only animal with royal duties. Ah, no. Step into the courtyard. There, hear that flutter? That's the sound of royal doves. Not for sending messages, but for predicting the weather. If the doves flew in circles, it meant good news. If they flew straight, the steward would quietly warn the kitchen. Storms were likely, and the king would need extra warm soup. Yep, all from the wings of birds. Now, look to the long halls. There's a golden cage, gently swaying. Inside, a parrot with green and red feathers, named Sir Featherhelm, the only bird in the kingdom allowed to speak. He had learned over 20 phrases, like, Your Majesty is most radiant, tea is served, and oddly, tell the cook I said no onions. They say, the parrot once repeated a noble's insult to the king, and that noble was never seen again. Deeper still, we find a shadowed stone room. It smells of hay, iron, and feathers. A boy kneels beside a creature, a falcon, sharp-eyed, fierce, but not wild. No, this falcon belonged to the prince. He named it Ashfang, and every morning, before the court met, the prince whispered his plans into Ashfang's feathers. Was it silly? Maybe. But on the day a rival tried to deceive the court, Ashfang refused to fly near him. The prince smiled. Some say the bird could sense lies. Some say, the prince believed what he needed to. Now let's walk into the queen's chamber. Near the fire, a basket of warmth. Inside, 2 royal cats. Their names were Mist and Clover. They were allowed on the bed. They were allowed in the library. They were not allowed near the dog. But sometimes, Mist would sit beside the king during meetings. She'd purr when she approved of a decision. and hiss when she didn't. Once during a treaty discussion, she scratched a noble's ankle. The treaty was never signed. Coincidence? Maybe. Out in the gardens there's a gentle deer, antlers smooth, eyes dark and calm, named Blessing. He had been rescued from a hunt by the youngest princess. She refused to let him go. So, they built him a home behind the chapel. Every morning she would brush his fur. Every evening she'd tell him what the stars looked like. When she turned 16, Blessing was the first to receive her ribbon. Not a knight, not a suitor, just a deer. Now to the moat. Yes, the moat, where the royal geese live. Geese, not exciting. These geese had names. They had jobs. And they were more feared than the guards. Because they remembered faces. If a visitor once scared them, even slightly, they would chase him every time he returned. The king once said, "Trust the geese, they know more than we do." And honestly, he was probably right. There were also royal frogs. Oh yes, frogs. But not just for croaking. They were kept in small bowls near the queen's mirror. Because she believed if the frogs were still, it meant peace. If they hopped or stirred, it meant gossip. And when 3 frogs leapt at once during a hairdressing session, that same afternoon, the queen's cousin was caught spreading rumors. Coincidence? You know better by now. And then, the boar. Yes, a royal boar, fierce, untamed, but deeply loyal to the king's brother. He called it Root. Root followed no one, except him. It walked beside his horse during hunts, slept outside his tent during wars, and once even charged a thief who dared touch the prince's ring. The thief limped for weeks, but Root, he was given a feast. Boars don't usually get affection, but this one, he earned it. There was even a royal fish, just one, a glimmering goldfin that lived in a stone bowl. Its name was Glint, and it swam slowly, lazily, with elegance. Every Thursday the princess would sit and tell Glint about her week. She believed the fish kept her grounded. And when Glint passed away, the entire court wore blue, even the guards. And that night it rained for hours. The princess said Glint sent it, so she could cry without being seen. Now let's look at the strangest animal of all. A royal snail. Yes, a snail. It lived in a little box lined with moss. The youngest prince adored it. He named it Sir Slimeworth. He made it a tiny paper crown. And he swore it once moved faster when music played. For years he brought Slimeworth to council meetings. Not to participate, but just to remind the others. Even the slowest deserve a voice. The council never argued with that. Finally, there was a shadowed, whispered rumor of a ghost dog, only seen by those close to death. A quiet hound, black as ink, with glowing blue eyes. It never barked. It never walked. It simply stood at the edge of one's bed, and then vanished. It was never feared, because it meant peace was near. Even the queen once smiled when she saw it. "Ah," she whispered, "you've come."
So you see,
Royalty wore jewels, but their hearts belonged to fur, feathers, scales, and hooves. In the quiet of the night, in moments of fear or loneliness, it was never the crown that brought comfort. It was the warmth of a lapdog, the flutter of a dove, the hum of a cat's purr, and the silent, sacred loyalty of those without voices, but full of soul. So next time you see a pet sleeping nearby, maybe, just maybe, they're dreaming of a crown, and once upon a time, they wore one. Sleep softly, the court of creatures watches over us still. The weird life of royalty in medieval times, continuing ever so gently. Tonight, let's open a heavy wooden door, creaking just slightly. Step into a place where secrets whispered louder than shouts, where candles melted slowly beside tired hands, where time stretched, and decisions took root. Yes, tonight, we enter the royal council chamber, but not the grand golden halls you might expect. No, this chamber was often quiet, dusty, and oddly human. You see, we often imagine royalty as unstoppable, powerful, always right, always decisive. But that's not quite true. Because ruling a kingdom wasn't just swords and speeches, it was hours and hours of meetings. Yes, boring, long, heated, tired meetings. Let's slip into one of those now. There's a table thick, oaken, deeply scratched from decades of fingers tapping. Around it, 12 chairs. In them, a monk, a merchant, a knight, a landowner, a scribe, a bishop, and of course, the king or queen at the end. But let me tell you a little something. They didn't agree on much. Nope. Not about the harvest. Not about taxes. Not even about the best type of candle wax. Sometimes, They argued for hours, over salt. Yes, salt. Because one bishop believed it should be taxed for moral reasons. Another claimed it made people drink more wine. And the merchant, he just wanted to sell it. The king sat quietly, watching the candle melt. And when the topic turned to bridges, oh no, that was a full-day discussion. Do we build one here? No, that floods. But over there? No, it's near the sheep. But the sheep might like the bridge. Yes, that happened. At one point, a knight slammed his fist and shouted, then asked the sheep, Everyone laughed, even the king. You might wonder, were these people wise? Sometimes. Other times, they were just tired men in robes, scratching parchment and eating too many dried figs. Because the truth was, royal councils were made up of people. Just people. People who argued, forgot things, changed their minds, or fell asleep mid-meeting. Yes, the chancellor once snored during a bread pricing debate. They let him sleep. He was old, and probably dreaming of better bread. Now, behind the table, there was a door, a small one. It led to a little room called the records nook. Inside, stacks and stacks of scrolls, maps, decrees, recipes, poems, drawings of pigs. No one knows why. But those scrolls, they were the memory of the kingdom. When someone asked, when did we tax cheese last? The clerk would vanish into the records nook and return, 20 minutes later, covered in dust, holding a scroll that simply read, cheese, 1 Farshin 87, mild unrest. Ah, so they taxed eggs instead. Sometimes the royal council would get interrupted. Once, by a bat. Yes, a real bat. It flew in through the chimney, circled the chamber, and settled on the king's crown. No one moved, not for 22 minutes. They believed it was an omen. Of what? Well, no one agreed. But they adjourned the meeting early, and fed the guards extra soup, just in case. Now, let's talk about the council symbols. Every chair had a mark carved into it. The knights? A sword crossed with a feather. The merchants? A coin next to a loaf of bread. The monks? A candle melting over a book. The queens? A single star, with 12 tiny dots. No one knows what that meant. She never explained it. She just smiled whenever someone asked. Each meeting began the same way. With a simple chant from the monk, we speak not to win, but to serve. Did they follow that rule? Sometimes. Other times, not so much. One spring, a debate broke out about banning blue dye. Yes, blue dye. The bishop claimed it encouraged vanity. The tailor argued it made people feel hopeful. The knight shrugged and said, I just like the color. In the end, they banned it for 1 week. And when no one seemed happier or sadder, they just stopped enforcing it. But the tailor kept wearing purple, just in case. There were moments of deep seriousness too. When famine hit, when disease crept through the streets, when warships were spotted in the mist. That table, once dusty and filled with crumbs, became the beating heart of survival. Decisions weren't always right, but they were heavy, and every name etched in those scrolls was someone trying to hold a kingdom together, with words, not swords. Sometimes, during long sessions, they'd bring in food, bread, dried apples, on cold days, hot onion stew, and once, just once, a rogue scribe brought pies, sweet, warm, fragrant pies. The room fell silent when the aroma filled the air. Even the bishop sighed. They didn't speak for 3 minutes, just chewed, and for that short while, even politics felt soft. Now, every decision made at that table was written in ink, with a feathered quill, on parchment made from sheepskin. Some pages still survive. They tell stories of rules, yes, but also of hearts. One decree simply said, let no window face directly west. It blinds the guards at sunset. Another, all cats belonging to the court may sleep in any room they choose. That one was signed by 3 people, and 1 paw print. Not everything was noble. Some counselors took bribes, some lied, some disappeared, but the table remained. And every new monarch sat there, knowing their voice would echo where others once whispered. Before we leave, let's peek behind the throne. There's a small tapestry, faded, quiet. It shows 12 figures around a circle, each holding a piece of bread. Above them stitched in gold thread. Truth feeds more than silence. A reminder maybe, that even in the dustiest corners of power, some tried, some listened, some truly cared. So when you imagine royalty, don't just think of crowns and jewels. Think of 12 tired souls, arguing over salt and soup. while a candle slowly dies between them. And remember, sometimes, the most powerful place in a kingdom is just a room with a table. The weird life of royalty in medieval times. Tonight, let's pull away from the noise of chambers, feasts, and politics, and step outside the stone walls. Ah yes, the royal gardens. You might imagine them grand, but they weren't always so. Sometimes, they were quiet, uneven little plots of earth, hidden behind ivy-covered fences. A place where kings and queens went to breathe, to be still, to forget they were rulers, and just be people. Let's take a slow walk there now. The grass beneath your feet, soft but patchy. The soil, damp, with tiny herbs poking through. A lavender bush, heavy with scent. Nearby, a rosemary patch, left wild and tangled. Someone forgot to trim it again, probably on purpose. And tucked in a corner, a stone bench, cold but smooth. This is where they came, when the world felt too much, when letters spoke of war, when council meetings ended in shouting, when their crown weighed too heavy. They came here, to sit, to dig their fingers into dirt, to watch ants just march along. Ah, you might not think a queen would kneel to plant carrots, but she did. Yes, she even named them. One was called Margaret. A gardener once told a scribe, "Her Majesty weeps less after touching the soil," and that scribe wrote it down, because it mattered. The royal gardens weren't filled with roses and gold statues. They had leeks, wild onions, faded marigolds, a stubborn pear tree, and a pond, where frogs held meetings of their own. At the far edge, a wooden shed, filled with tools, a rusty trowel, a bent rake, a watering can that leaked from the bottom. The king preferred that one, said it kept the plants humble. Once, a young prince was scolded for trying to plant a coin. He thought it might grow into a money tree. The gardener just smiled, and watered the spot anyway. Now, look up, do you see the tower from here? Yes, just barely, peeking over the hedges. Even royalty liked it that way. When they sat here, the castle felt far. They could almost pretend they were just farmers, just lovers, just quiet people. Birds came often. Robins, wrens, little ones with soft wings, and once, a hawk circled so low, it startled the Duke into dropping his cheese. He never forgave it. They started calling the hawk Sir Cheesebane. Yes, it stuck. Even the Queen giggled the next time it flew by. Now, on certain days, the gardens became a classroom. Not with books, but with smells and dirt and wind. Royal children learned here, not just about plants, but patience. Because potatoes don't rush. And time takes time, and bees don't care who your father is. One princess was known to sneak out during formal banquets, just to check on her tomatoes. She once wore a silk gown, while shoveling compost. The servants were horrified. She didn't care. The tomatoes grew sweet that year. There was also a tree, the heart tree. No one knew what kind it was. Its fruit was bitter, its bark gnarled and strange. But it stood in the center of the garden, tall and calm. People said if you sat under it long enough, your troubles would fall like leaves. The queen sat there during a war year, twice. The king sat there when he lost a friend. A servant boy once fell asleep under it, and woke up smiling. Maybe the stories were true. Or maybe the quiet was enough. Some days, a soft harp would play. A minstrel, hidden behind the hedges. No one told him to stop. They just listened. Even the frogs. Now near the path, there's a rock. Flat, cool, round. They say the prince carved into it as a child. Here I do not rule, I rest. And though moss covers it now, you can still feel the words with your fingers. You might be wondering, did the royal gardens serve any grand purpose? Did they feed the kingdom, cure plagues, write history? No, but they held sighs, and laughter, and silence, and in a world of noise, that mattered. In winter, snow blanketed the soil, everything slept, even the lavender, even the frogs. But sometimes, a lone figure would come, wrapped in furs, just to sit on the stone bench, with steam rising from their breath, and peace curling around their shoulders. The garden had no crown, no guards, no demands, just time, and wind, and things that grew slowly. And isn't that a kind of royalty too? To grow something gentle, in a world that often wasn't. When the last queen passed, they buried her in the garden, not under the heart tree, but beside the rosemary patch. She had asked for that. Her stone read, "Let me return where I found peace." And every spring, the rosemary blooms first. So next time you think of kings and queens, don't just imagine thrones and armor. Imagine soil under fingernails, a frog croaking on a lily pad, a carrot named Margaret, and a place where even the most powerful could be still. Yes, royalty ruled lands, but sometimes they just wanted to watch something grow. The weird life of royalty in medieval times. The final stretch. Just one more soft breath of history before we rest. Tonight, we aren't visiting chambers or thrones or gardens. We're not peeking behind the velvet curtains or under the banquet tables. No, tonight, we walk through the dreams of medieval royalty. Yes, even kings and queens dreamed, but their dreams were strange, quiet, and sometimes oddly ordinary. There's a little scroll tucked deep in the archive of an old monastery, faded ink, parchment like fragile leaves. It holds the sleep journal of a 14th century queen. She never told anyone about it, only her pillow, and that one little monk who never told a soul. Well, except when he wrote it down. She dreamed of being a baker. Not the royal kind with goose pies and sugar towers. Just a small town baker, kneading dough at sunrise, dusting flour off her elbows. No one bowing, no one staring, just warm bread and silence. She said in her dream, the crust always cracked perfectly. A king, once mighty and feared in battle, confessed on his deathbed, "I dreamed of sweeping floors." Yes, with a broom, in a dusty little inn. No battles, no feasts, just straw, and a cat that purred at his feet. They say a young princess once told her tutor, "Last night I dreamed I was a goose," and she was delighted. Flapping, floating. No tight corsets, no lessons, just wind under wings, and a quiet lake. She asked if she could study geese after that. And so, she did. For a while the palace had a little flock, and she visited them every morning. She even gave them names, Sir Honk, Lady Fluffle, and Sir Beaky III. Sometimes royalty dreamed of things they never had, like eating a whole apple without slicing it first, or falling asleep without someone watching the door, or laughing really laughing, without worrying how they looked. One queen recorded a dream where she was invisible. She wandered the streets, unrecognized, sat on a fountain edge, and hummed a song she made up on the spot. No one bowed, no one cared, and it was perfect. Now, there was a prince, shy, quiet, who never wanted the throne. He dreamed often of being a painter, not of royal portraits or cathedral ceilings, but of chickens. Yes, he said they were the perfect shape. He filled pages with them, fat ones, thin ones, ones with curious eyes, ones that looked like they held secrets. He never ruled, but his chicken sketches still survive. They hang in a dusty hallway of a forgotten abbey, and they're charming. In one recorded dream, a king is walking barefoot through the forest, each step soft with moss. The wind brushes his face. He finds a stump, sits, waits, and then nothing happens. That's it. The monk who wrote it down added, "It was the happiest the king ever looked." A princess once dreamed she was a candle, burning slowly, gently, lighting a dark room, quietly helping others see. She told no one but her maid, and the maid whispered it to the stars. They say the stars told the moon, and the moon still remembers. Some royalty had dreams that felt like memories, but from lives they never lived. A queen once said she dreamed of being a shepherd's daughter, braiding grass, skipping stones, her hands rough and happy. The next day she refused to wear gloves at court. Let her skin feel. Another time, a prince dreamed of being a fish, swimming, nothing more, just water, and movement, and the world above a ripple he never needed to understand. He woke up smiling, and asked for smoked herring for breakfast. The strangest dream of all. It came from a jester. He said he dreamed he was the king, and that the king dreamed he was the jester. They traded dreams for one night, and both woke up weeping. No scroll explains why, but maybe they understood each other in ways the waking world never allowed. Dreams were the only place where royalty could unbutton their fate. Let it slip to the floor like a heavy cloak. They became wind, stones, mice, butchers, poets, sleepy farmers, trees, or just a pair of feet, walking through tall grass, toward nothing in particular. And when they woke, they sometimes carried a softness with them, the queen who spoke gentler the next day, the king who pardoned a thief with eyes like his dream goat, the prince who started a goose garden, lice. Not all history is made with war and crowns. Some of it happens in sleep, in the soft hum between heartbeats, in the dreams they never told, but lived, just for a moment. So now, if you are still awake, I think you have to see the video from the 17th minute of the story, or play this side video, as maybe it can help you sleep even better. Good night, and dream gently.